A pen scratches across parchment as an unseen attendant softly announces to their lord that someone has arrived. The lord coolly grants entry as the attendant presents Miss Michelle, daughter of the border Marquis Verdier. Seated without lifting his gaze, the young husband coldly tells his new bride that a royal decree forced this marriage against his will, vowing he will never love the ill-reputed woman known as the Wicked Saint. A sly smile curls across the bride's lips as she purrs that they are in perfect agreement, having come just as unwillingly under the same royal order. Pressing a graceful hand to her chest, the luminous silver-haired woman warmly offers her pleasure at finally meeting him. Her eyes close in a serene, almost wicked smile as she softly declares that she is the villainess of this story. The scene shifts 2 weeks earlier to the towering Grand Cathedral of Orio in the capital of Orbia, where desperate voices beg the saint to do something. Trembling and tearful, a woman named Michelle Verdier pleads for help as the saints regretfully explain that their holy powers are simply not omnipotent. Refusing to accept it, a companion protests that this cannot be true while Michelle whimpers that if this continues she will surely be finished. A plump, tearful noble girl wails in melodramatic despair that if this keeps up she will waste away far too skinny and disappear entirely. Aghast at the absurdity, the Grand Saint listens as the girl insists that losing her appetite this badly must be a genuine illness. The exasperated saint dryly wonders if that isn't more than enough, since the girl managed only 5 steaks, 10 loaves of bread, a whole meat pie, and 30 biscuits since yesterday. Straining to hold her composure, the Grand Saint privately laments how the church exhausts her every day with the unreasonable, selfish demands of entitled nobles. The scene widens as she explains that in this land, any woman born with light attribute magic is recognized as a saint, the most powerful among them crowned the Grand Saint. Rows of veiled women appear as she reveals that light attribute bearers are extraordinarily rare, numbering only 13 saints in the entire kingdom. Above a monster-ringed map, she recounts that the saint's duty is to feed light energy into the magical devices hidden beneath the Grand Cathedral. Dark beasts loom over the land as she describes their second duty, maintaining the vast barrier that shields the whole country from rampaging monsters, before hinting at yet another obligation. Beneath a towering goddess statue, she explains that saints heal those who beg the church for aid, though that mercy is granted strictly by the size of one's donation, leaving the poor untreated. While she alone upholds the barrier day and night, nobles and wealthy merchants flood the church laden with obscene donations. Her weary profile darkens as she confesses that maintaining the barrier all by herself is already an almost unbearable strain. A mustachioed nobleman lounges before her, vainly complaining that his neck hurt the moment he woke this morning. Convinced he merely slept in a poor position, he imperiously orders the saint to heal him at once. Another disheveled noble whines that he grew a little too excited and has now been left with aching muscle pain. Clutching his chest in lovesick anguish, another flushed noble swoons that love hurts so much he can no longer sleep at night. He desperately implores the saint to erase the pain in his chest, then frantically adds that she must not erase his feelings for the woman. Pressing her palm to her aching brow, the exhausted Grand Saint silently wonders aloud what all this incessant noise could possibly be. A statuesque dark-haired saint smiles coolly and warns that behaving this disgracefully while calling herself the Grand Saint reflects badly on them all. Stephanie reminds Michelle that she will be attending the royal palace banquet later, framing it less as a question than a command. The narration reveals that this imposing figure, Stephanie Lightencourt, is one of the 13 saints, exactly like Michelle herself, and she warns that Michelle might tarnish the reputation of her fiancé, Prince Alphonse. Reaching out to adjust Michelle's collar with manicured fingers, Stephanie purrs that she should take good care of her appearance, because if she does not the consequences could be severe. Leaning close with veiled contempt, Stephanie remarks that Michelle is, after all, merely a commoner's daughter and an orphan, then muses cruelly that perhaps such a thing would not be a problem in the end. Standing with serene superiority, Stephanie explains that the higher one's social status, the greater the magical power one is born with, which makes a commoner with such vast magic an exceedingly rare case. Pressing down hard with the heel of her shoe, Stephanie coldly bids Michelle to enjoy today's banquet. Looming over the smaller saint with predatory delight, Stephanie sneers that this very banquet may be the last stage Michelle ever stands upon, one already far above her station. Michelle lowers her gaze in weary silence, the weight of the threat settling over her composed features. Watching Stephanie depart with her retinue, Michelle stammers a faint question before privately concluding that the Duke's daughter is unmistakably plotting something. The narration notes that the scheme is painfully obvious. the malice radiating from the encounter impossible to mistake. The scene shifts to a grand castle standing beneath a star-strewn night sky as a furious voice cries out Michel Verdier's name. Within the opulent banquet hall, an enraged noble demands to know what that appearance is meant to be, even if she was originally an orphan. The blonde aggressor berates her for looking so thin she appears emaciated and declares that if she is the crown prince's fiancée, she ought to pay far more attention to her appearance. Throwing his arm wide before the assembled court, the seething prince proclaims that a woman like her is absolutely unfit to be Alphonse Orbia's fiancée. A dawning realization sharpens Michel's tearful expression as she quietly understands what all of this has truly been about. Jabbing an accusing finger her way, the indignant Prince Alphonse rails that she has had a lot of nerve from the very start, daring to claim the title of Grand Saint. Bristling with indignation, the Grand Saint protests that she was merely appointed to the role and never once called herself by that lofty title. Jabbing an accusing finger, Prince Alphonse insists she does rely on the title of Grand Saint while abandoning her important duties and dumping them onto the other saints. Her composure fractures as Alphonse claims that parts of the barrier have weakened because of her negligence, and she can only manage a stunned question in reply. Standing rigid amid the murmuring crowd, the saint coldly demands to know exactly who he heard such a damning thing from. Cornered by her sharp gaze, Alphonse falters and stammers that the source of his accusation is difficult to name aloud. A statuesque dark-haired saint steps forward with a serene smile as the eager prince reveals that it is Stephanie who has come to set things right. Lowering her lashes with veiled malice, Stephanie purrs that the serious girl was deeply hurt by Michel's domineering behavior and came to consult her. A chilling realization settles over Michel as she understands that the baseless rumors whispered about her for the past half-year were entirely Stephanie's doing. Watching the picture assemble itself, Alphonse muses with smug satisfaction that he finally sees how things truly stand. Grinning cruelly, the prince offers that if Michel is willing to apologize, he might be persuaded to lessen her punishment by a little. Meeting his gaze without a trace of fear, the saint calmly tells him there is no need for that, then presses him to reveal what His Highness intends to declare in the end. Sweeping his arm wide before the assembled court, Alphonse proclaims that he hereby annuls their engagement and strips Michel of her position as Grand Saint. The prince declares with relish that Stephanie, who will become the new Grand Saint, shall take Michel's place as his fiancée. A stunned hush grips the hall as the nobles freeze, struggling to absorb the sweeping pronouncement just made. Leaning close to the dumbstruck saint, Alphonse confirms coldly that no matter how much she cries or begs, his decision will not change. Wide-eyed and breathless, Michel privately seizes on a single dazzling thought, asking herself whether this means she is finally free. Caught off guard by her reaction, Alphonse hesitantly confirms that yes, that is indeed right. Tears of pure joy welling in her eyes, the liberated saint beams radiantly and thanks His Highness Prince Alphonse with overflowing sincerity. Catching them all completely off guard, Michel confesses that today, for the very first time, she has come to like the prince just a tiny bit. Spinning toward the doors with flowers blooming around her, the elated saint declares she is in a hurry and simply cannot remain in this place a moment longer. Left standing dumbstruck beside Stephanie, Alphonse and the entire hall gape in blank confusion at her jubilant departure. The scene draws back to introduce the imposing crowned figure as Alvaros Orbia, king of the kingdom of Orbia, as a voice cries out for him. Within Michel's sparse palace chambers, the king flatly orders her to get up off the floor while the narration wryly notes that owning little luggage makes packing convenient at times like these. Kneeling before her bound future, Michel reflects that the engagement between the crown prince and herself was, from the very beginning, a restraint meant to keep her inside the country. Standing veiled before the throne, the narration recounts that long ago, to prevent saints with precious magical power from leaking to other nations, women recognized as saints were married within the country, the highest among them wed to royalty or high-ranking nobles. The narration explains that Michel, despite being an orphan, possessed enormous magical power and was adopted by the border Marquis Verdier to acquire noble status, thus becoming the fiancée of His Highness Prince Alphonse. The narration reveals that the prince was dissatisfied with taking a woman of such humble origins as his wife, and less than 3 months after their first meeting he began treating her coldly. It explains that because a former orphan became the crown prince's fiancée and was appointed Grand Saint, it provoked intense opposition from the other saints. Then one day, the narration notes, the saints abruptly began boycotting their sacred duties entirely. And the work that should have been carried out by those negligent saints, Michel observes bitterly, all came crashing down onto her alone. Gazing wearily ahead, she concedes that, just as Alphonse claimed, cracks truly did begin to appear in parts of the barrier, since it was impossible for her alone to bear the workload meant for 13 saints. Snapping with long-suppressed exasperation, the saint demands how she was ever supposed to find time to care about her appearance while the oblivious nobles dismissed her as merely shabby. Gesturing to her thin frame, Michelle argues it was only natural her body wasted away when there were stretches she could not even eat, and snaps that any complaints belong with the church that ignored the other saints' negligence. A flicker of doubt crosses her face as she quietly wonders what will happen to the barrier once she leaves. Brushing the worry aside, she reasons that 12 saints still remain to manage somehow, resolves to prioritize escaping the palace, and decides to think about it later. Throwing her hands skyward with radiant joy, the freed saint declares that she is setting off toward a bright future. The scene moves to the royal court, where attendants bow low before the aged Alvaros Orbia and address their king. Sinking to the floor in stunned disbelief, Michelle manages only a strangled syllable as the king gravely announces there is something he would like to discuss with her. Her fist clenches white against the windowsill as the crushing truth lands, and she silently screams that she was too late to escape. The narration introduces the brooding nobleman fuming that the foolish king is spouting utter nonsense as Oscar Verdier, Lord of the Border, marked her adoptive father. The narration identifies the tearful woman embracing her, begging forgiveness for failing to notice her condition until now, as Adelaide Verdier, wife of the Border Marquis, her adoptive mother. Gathered protectively around the trembling saint, the Verdier family urges her over and over to please calm down a little. The narration sets the scene, explaining that Michelle has now returned to her birthplace, the Border Market of Verdier, far from the capital, only a few days after the uproar over her broken engagement. Tears streaming down their faces, the Marquis and his wife exclaim that Michelle always wrote there was no problem in her letters and never once came home. The atmosphere darkens ominously as the narration notes that then suddenly, without any prior warning, everything changed. A heavy dread descends over the household as the Marquis, the butler, and the maid freeze in alarm at some unseen arrival. Faces twisting in collective horror, the family and servants stare in wide-eyed shock at the thing that has appeared before them. Smiling gently despite the panic, Michelle listens as her family confesses they were terrified to death by her thin body and pale, bluish face, and she softly tells them she is truly sorry about that. The grieving Marquis recounts that when they finally heard the full details of how Michelle was treated in the capital and the uproar over her annulment, then came the final blow that crushed them all. A fresh royal decree lies spread upon the table, issued in the name of Alvaros Orbia, ordering that the marriage between Miss Michelle Verdier and Marquis Christophe Dudevant be completed within 1 month. Lowering her gaze with strained resignation, Michelle quietly confirms that yes, this is indeed the order she received. The scene rewinds as Michelle explains that the decree came down upon her shortly after she was detained at the royal palace. She recalls that the king himself handed her a letter sealed with his royal crest, its contents, as written, an order to marry Marquis Christophe Dudevant. Standing before the looming king, she notes that she had never once met this Marquis in person before, and that, much like herself, he rarely appears in aristocratic society. The narration formally introduces the absent groom as Marquis Christophe Dudevant, framed amid a flourish of dark roses. Beneath a deliberately imaginary illustration, the narration describes the 27-year-old who governs the Dudevant territory and is infamously known as the Lecherous Marquis, said to have carried on many questionable relationships with women. A darker rumor follows as the narration notes ominously that this Marquis is also said to have a young child. Sipping her tea with deepening dismay, Michelle wonders whether it is truly a woman's fate, on her very first marriage, to wed a lustful Marquis who already has a child. Her composure shatters as the cup tips and the dark tea sloshes over the rim like the ruin of her fragile hopes. Trembling with clenched fists, the saint cries out in raw disbelief, demanding to know whether any of this can possibly be for real. Her indignation pours out in a flood, asking whether this is the reward for years of devoted service, now that she thought herself finally free of the idiot crown prince and the duties of a saint, only to be handed a lecherous man with a child. Her hand clenches white-knuckled as she seethes, demanding to know exactly how long they intend to keep toying with her like this. In a quiet study, the mustachioed Marquis Verdier gently tells his startled daughter that she is not obligated to accept the royal order by force, leaving Michelle able to manage only a stunned question in reply. The Marquis offers gently that if Michelle wishes it, the family can smuggle her safely across the border into a neighboring country. He notes with quiet confidence that, fortunately, the Verdier family happens to have the right connections there. Michelle's heart aches as she recalls being taken in as a filthy orphan, taught, educated, and loved as true family, and she realizes they care for her from the very bottom of their hearts. Clutching her apron tightly, Michelle quietly counters that fleeing the royal order now would bring ruin upon the family, condemning all of Verdier collectively because of her. The Marquis leans close and reassures her tenderly that it is all right, that if it ever becomes necessary, they will simply find another way. A slow, dangerous smile spreads across his face as he declares that they will crush the royal family by force, leaving Michelle utterly stunned. He explains evenly that the border market of Verdier has never known peace, hardened by constant skirmishes with neighboring countries and relentless attacks by magical beasts, so its knights are nothing like the capital's. He points out that the capital's knights rely entirely on the barrier and have almost no real combat experience, while his own knights have fought genuine battles again and again. Michelle protests faintly that this may be true, but the Marquis simply asserts that unless something extraordinary happens, defeat is unthinkable. Pressing his advantage, he adds that, moreover, their family has carried a bitter feud with the royal family stretching back 3 full generations. Adelaide calmly interjects that registering Michelle into the Verdier family while she was engaged to the crown prince was itself part of the royal family's scheme to placate that long-standing conflict. She continues pointedly that while they had believed it their duty to feel grateful merely for being permitted to take Michelle in, the royals were the ones who chose to annul that engagement themselves. Adelaide's voice sharpens as she recounts how they then exploited Michelle like a mere tool and spread vicious false rumors about her, leaving the girl stammering in flustered disbelief. The Marquis muses darkly that such treatment is practically a declaration of war against them, wondering aloud whether the royals are truly serious. A cold dread creeps over Michelle as the full weight of her parents' intentions settles upon her. The Marquis presses on with grim relish, noting that there is currently no war and his knights stand at their absolute peak, so a single decisive strike would finish the matter entirely. Michelle's eyes widen in alarm as she grasps, breathlessly, that they truly intend to go to war against the royal family. A horrified Michelle cries out that this is absolutely unacceptable, knowing that an all-out war would leave even Verdier scarred and would inevitably drag innocent civilians into the bloodshed. Stepping forward at last, she addresses her father and mother directly with quiet resolve. Her expression softening into something luminous and certain, Michelle tells them gently that there is no need to use force at all. The Marquis can only murmur her name, watching his daughter with a mixture of worry and dawning curiosity. Stepping forward with quiet resolve, Michelle asks her father pointedly whether he truly intends to marry her into the Dudevant family. The Marquis reassures her that she need not worry about them, declaring firmly that he never wishes to become the spark that ignites a war. Michelle confesses with a pained smile that while she cannot accept it, she cannot allow bloodshed to happen on her account, adding that she was never particularly interested in marriage anyway. Raising a single finger, the Marquis announces that there is, moreover, one more thing to consider. A faint, wry smile crosses Michelle's face as she muses that compared to that idiot prince, any man at all would seem noble and wonderful. She reasons that if Christophe is willing to wed a woman branded a villainess, then any woman would do, conceding he is still a terrible person before resolving that she understands and will contact the Marquis to proceed with the arrangements. Pressing her hand gently, the Marquis tells Michelle that if she ever finds Christophe unbearable, she must run away to the neighboring country before the marriage is officially registered. The mother vows tenderly that they will handle everything that comes afterward, no matter the cost, leaving Michelle to whisper her name in quiet astonishment. The Marquis declares warmly that more than anything they wish for her happiness, while the mother adds that they will always be on her side, and a tearful Michelle can only murmur for her father. Wrapped in their embrace, Michelle silently thanks these kind people from the very bottom of her heart and prays that they will always remain happy. The scene shifts to a darkened study, where a butler presents Lord Christophe with the documents concerning Miss Michelle Verdier, daughter of the border Marquis. Adjusting his monocle, the elderly attendant explains that due to the limited time they were only able to gather the rumors circulating within aristocratic circles, and Christophe answers flatly that he sees. Christophe broods over the sudden marriage order issued by the king himself, exhaling a long, weary breath. An imaginary illustration unfolds as the report paints Michelle as notorious for her fondness for men, extravagantly adorned, prowling out nightly for amusement, hungry for power, fawning over the powerful, and sneering down upon her inferiors. Resting his hand on the papers, Christophe concludes coldly that she truly is the wicked saint. His expression hardening, he demands to know why he should ever take such a wicked woman as his wife. Christophe broods that since it is a royal order there is no escaping it, resolving to give her a generous allowance and house her in a separate residence far from himself. The scene shifts 5 days later, as a carriage arrives and Michel steps down before the towering Dudevant estate. A maid bows and welcomes Michel warmly to the house of Dudevant. The monocled servant introduces himself as Firmin, head butler of the household, offering that it is a pleasure to meet her. Returning a gentle smile, Michel replies that the pleasure is hers and introduces herself as Michel Verdier. Firmin apologizes courteously for troubling Miss Michel when she must be tired from her journey. Extending a hand toward the corridor, he announces that his lord wishes to greet her. Michel steadies her nerves as the butler invites her, with practiced grace, to please come this way. The household servants murmur quietly as Michel is led down a sunlit hall toward her waiting husband-to-be. Halting before a grand set of doors, Firmin announces softly to his lord that he has brought Miss Michel, and the voice within commands him to let her in. The doors swing open and Michel steps into the room in heavy, breathless silence. Behind a vast desk sits a young man, and Michel realizes with a start that this is Marquis Christophe Dudevant himself. She studies him quietly, noting his shiny black hair. Michel takes in his calm presence and his cold, composed features, so unlike anything she had pictured. A wry inner voice asks whether he is different from what she had imagined, even as she keeps her composure. Christophe bends over his papers, and Michel privately admits that it is true his appearance would appeal to women. She muses warily that perhaps men like this are the ones most steeped in lust, a refreshing exterior wrapped around a monstrous interior, just as he announces that since it is a royal order he will marry her unwillingly. Without lifting his gaze, Christophe declares coldly that he will never love her, the ill-reputed woman known as the Wicked Saint. Michel blinks in mild surprise, noting that even the lecherous Marquis does not take kindly to this wicked woman, and asks dryly whether he is fully aware of the rumors about her. She observes that his utter lack of interest in her works entirely in her favor, though she wonders aloud whether it is not rather rude, bordering on impolite, to say such things without even looking at her. A small, knowing smile touches her lips as she remarks that it seems the two of them are in complete agreement. Mirroring his detachment exactly, Michel informs him evenly that she, too, came here unwillingly because of the royal order. Christophe's head snaps up, and he stammers a bewildered, "Huh." Michel lowers her gaze with a faint, enigmatic smile as the words, "a wicked woman," hang strangely in the air between them. Lifting her chin with quiet pride, she declares plainly that she is, indeed, the wicked woman. The two stand frozen in mutual silence, the butler watching from the doorway as the misunderstanding deepens. Pressing a hand to his mouth, a dawning realization washes over Christophe as he murmurs that he sees now. Tilting his head in genuine confusion, he asks her pointedly whether this means she is merely a substitute. Michel's composure cracks into a startled, wide-eyed, flustered at last, she demands to know what on earth he means by substitute, while Christophe presses whether she was not sent in place of Michel Verdier. The room erupts as the two trade panicked exclamations, each branding the absent schemer a truly vile woman who must be laughing somewhere right now, Christophe explaining he only pretended to submit to the royal order to expose her. Throwing up her hands in desperation, Michel cries out that this is precisely why she has been trying to tell him the truth. Throwing her whole body into the declaration, Michel insists fiercely that she is, without a doubt, that very wicked woman, the real Michel Verdier. Christophe recoils with a sweat-drenched shout, demanding what kind of wicked woman ever announces herself as a wicked woman in the first place. The butler Firmin protests in vain that she is standing right there in front of them, while Christophe presses on that her frail body and pale hair make it very hard to call her a noble lady at all, insisting that is not what he means. The scene draws back as a narrator observes that this is the fateful meeting between Michel Verdier, known as the Wicked Saint, and Christophe Dudevant, known as the Lecherous Marquis. Locked in their absurd standoff across the desk, the two glare at one another as the narrator declares that, thus, their union began. The scene shifts to a firelit chamber where a sly voice muses that, honestly, Alphonse always causes trouble. Swirling dark wine in a glass, the schemer concedes that the trick may not be one that can be used repeatedly, yet notes that even the Verdier and Dudevant families would never dare oppose a royal order. Lifting the glass with quiet satisfaction, the plotter reasons that once things settle down Michel can be reconnected with Alphonse, and that this way he has bought himself some time. Watching the flames dance, the schemer concludes that choosing the Dudevant family as her marital destination was frankly a brilliant idea, since Marquis Dudevant will never treat Michelle as a real wife. Half-shadowed and amused, the figure murmurs the title under his breath, the Lecherous Marquis. Half-shadowed and amused, the figure murmurs the title under his breath, the Lecherous Marquis. The crowned king raises his own glass of crimson wine and observes coldly that even where there is no fire, smoke may still rise. The scene snaps back to the study, where Michelle and Christophe remain frozen face to face, their misunderstanding hanging unbroken in the air. The narrator notes wryly that in the end the negotiations with Marquis Dudevant made no progress at all, leaving the dispute entirely unresolved, even as Firmin invites Lady Michelle to make herself comfortable. Sunlight slants across the quiet library as the narration continues that, for the time being, a fragile arrangement had been reached. Pressing a hand to his chest, Christophe decrees that until the truth is discovered she will remain in this house as Michelle Verdier. A flustered, blushing Michelle insists through gritted teeth that she has told him she is the real Michelle Verdier, while the narrator admits flatly that they simply did not believe her. A small, sly smile crosses Michelle's face as she confesses that for a moment it crossed her mind to show them the saint's healing magic to prove herself. Christophe erupts again that she is a vile woman, aghast that the schemer would send yet another saint as a substitute, while Michelle reflects that revealing her power would only complicate matters further, so she held back. Lowering her eyes with weary resignation, Michelle reassures herself that they will realize soon enough that she is the real one, and that it is impossible for them to find the absent woman anyway, so it is fine. Christophe informs her, with cold formality, that of course they will not ask her to fulfill the duties of a marquis's wife. He adds, almost dismissively, that she is free to spend her time more or less as she pleases. Noticing her blank stare, Christophe demands whether she is even listening, explaining that by the wedding deadline set by the king they will reconsider the matter, and that if the real one still isn't found by then. A radiant, mischievous smile breaks across Michelle's face as she chirps that of course she is the real one. Christophe studies her thoughtfully behind his hand, and Michelle tilts her head in silent, bewildered confusion. Pressing a finger to his lips, Christophe announces that he has one small question he would like to ask her. Behind a backdrop of stars and planets, he asks her, with strange gravity, what time she usually goes to bed. Michelle blinks in pure confusion, privately wondering whether he means when she sleeps, and admitting that it varies from day to day before asking why on earth that question matters and whether it has anything to do with all this. Averting his eyes awkwardly, Christophe mutters that it is nothing, just small talk, and that she shouldn't worry about it, leaving an incredulous Michelle to sputter that he wants to make small talk at a time like this. Snapping his pocket watch shut, Christophe calls for Firmin and declares that they will end the conversation here, noting that she must be tired after arriving. Firmin startles with a quiet gasp as Christophe instructs him, pointedly, to show her to that room, and the butler answers that he understands. Bowing graciously, Firmin tells Lady Michelle that the time has come and asks her to please come with him. As the narrator notes, she was guided to her room. Stepping into a lavish, rose-filled chamber, Michelle marvels in awe that it is truly splendid, exactly as expected of the marquis's wife's room. A faint cloud crosses her face as the narrator explains that, according to Firmin, the door at the far end of the room leads to the marital bedroom, and Michelle sighs that if only it weren't for that ominous door, everything would be perfect. Firmin explains pointedly that the room adjacent to the marital bedroom belongs to the marquis himself. In other words, Michelle's quarters and Christophe's connect directly through the marital bedroom between them. However, the butler clarifies that each door bears its own lock, and every person manages their own keys, spare included. Michelle muses with cautious relief that a door which can be locked is at least somewhat reassuring. A sudden knock startles her, and she brightly remarks that she must have wandered into the room without noticing. Jumping back from the door, Michelle wonders aghast whether she was far more tense than she realized. Pressing a hand to her chest, she scolds herself with weary exasperation that leaping at a mere knock means she truly needs to get a grip. Across the wall, Christophe pauses over his book and wonders with mild suspicion who could possibly be calling at this hour. Both flail in comedic panic, frantically reassuring themselves that it simply must be Firmin or one of the servants. Covering her face, Michelle breathes that she must calm down and compose herself a little. Straining toward the silence, she notes anxiously that the knocking has stopped and wonders whether she ought to have apologized. Resigning herself with a sigh, she decides she will simply ask Firmin tomorrow who it was. Blowing out her candle, Michelle reasons that she is tired anyway and will go to sleep now. The grand bedroom falls still beneath the moonlight, the ominous connecting door sitting quietly in the dark. Eyes snapping wide in the dark, Michelle despairs that she absolutely cannot sleep. Rolling over, she puzzles that it is strange to be so exhausted yet unable to drift off, recalling how as a saint she once collapsed into sleep as if losing consciousness. A sudden shock seizes her as something stirs at the edge of her vision. Bolting upright with a startled cry, Michelle freezes at the shifting shape against the window. Peering closer, she breathes in dawning recognition that it is only the shadow of a tree swaying outside. Slumping with a heavy sigh, she admits that the explanation does absolutely nothing to calm her nerves. A low creak shudders through the room as the connecting door slowly drifts open on its own. Scrambling back in terror, Michelle stares aghast and demands of the empty dark why the door has opened entirely by itself. Furman confirms with absolute certainty that the room adjoining the marital bedroom belongs to the Marquis himself. Beyond that single door, the butler explains, lies the marital bedroom that joins their two private quarters. He lays it out plainly. If that door were opened, the bedroom could be entered only from the wife's room or the Marquis'. Michelle reasons with mounting dread that the one with the right to open it could only be Marquis Dudevant, and wonders aghast why he would house a woman he believes to be a fake in the wife's room at all. Her imagination spirals luminously as she reinterprets his earlier question about her bedtime as a thinly veiled inquiry into when he might enter her room. Recalling it now, she frets that the meaningful look he gave her back then suddenly carries an ominous new weight. Her fevered imagination conjures the worst possible scenario, the Marquis looming half-dressed and promising to show the wicked fake a sweet dream tonight. Burying herself in panic, Michelle wails that she has no idea what she should do. She frets that she assured her mother-in-law and everyone else that everything would be perfectly fine. Clutching the blanket, she protests breathlessly that they have not even been officially registered as husband and wife, so they are not truly married yet. On top of that, she insists she is not remotely mentally prepared for any of this. Spiraling further, she frets that as a Verdier daughter improper behavior would be unthinkable, and that having never experienced anything like this she has no idea what to do. Flailing with comedic conviction, she declares that matters like this ought to proceed step by step first. The room falls abruptly silent, and Michelle blinks in confusion at the empty bedroom, realizing there is no one there at all. She drifts to the window in the dark, her own pale reflection staring back from the glass. A sudden creak makes her flinch, and she whirls about, certain something has stirred behind her. Steadying herself, Michelle murmurs the Marquis' name into the quiet, half expecting an answer. She burrows beneath the covers, exhausted yet wide awake, the connecting door watching silently across the dim room. Recovering her composure the next morning, Chelsea and Grace fuss over the new bride and gently insist she tell them if she needs anything at all. Realization dawns luminously as Michelle understands the late-night knocking, and the maids explain they brought her food last night, certain she was too tired to notice. So that, she marvels, was the truth of it. The one who had knocked at her door that night was simply Chelsea. Gazing at the cold breakfast tray, Michelle reflects with quiet relief that in the end nothing happened last night after all. Yet a strange melancholy lingers, and she puzzles over why she suddenly feels as though she has lost something as a woman. Brightening, Chelsea remembers herself and addresses her properly as Lady Michelle. The maid announces with practiced poise that she carries a message from the Lord, and Michelle asks uncertainly whether it truly comes from His Excellency. Christophe's instruction is relayed coolly. She is to come to the parlor once she finishes her breakfast. Michelle wonders anxiously what this could possibly be about, briefly entertaining the impossible thought that he has realized she is the real one before dismissing it outright. Resolving to simply find out when she arrives, she rises from the table as the maids see her off with an obliging all right. The scene shifts to the parlor, where Michelle frantically begs the Marquis to wait. Christophe takes her bandaged hands gently in his and tells her, with unexpected softness, that it is all right and she has nothing to worry about. Leaning close, he murmurs for her to simply be obedient and leave everything to him. Michelle pleads with rising panic to know why he is doing this so suddenly, insisting there is truly nothing for him to be afraid of. Doubling down with comedic desperation, she cries out that she really means it. The chaos resolves as the household stares on, Chelsea, Grace, and Furman all wondering aloud what exactly is going on here. Christophe flatly clarifies the absurd confusion. It is a medical examination, and he demands to know why on earth he should be the one forced to undergo it. Michelle protests that she is fine, but the household counters pointedly that she clearly needs a doctor and asks whether she has even looked at herself in the mirror. Insisting she simply does not eat very much, she is told her wasted frame can hardly be described that way, and that if this continues she will waste away and disappear. Kristoff presses on, noting pointedly that it seems she ate nothing the night before either. Cornered, Michelle deflects with a strained smile that the matter of last night was, well, for various reasons. He demands an accounting of her breakfast, and she admits sheepishly that she ate everything because it was easy to eat and very delicious. The narration drifts back, revealing that as a saint it was not unusual for her to be unable to eat properly at all. But this morning's breakfast, she reflects, was gentle on her stomach and easy to digest in a way ordinary food never managed. Comprehension blooms as she realizes that her trouble had always been ordinary food, the very thing that made her inevitably eat less. She turns to thank Chelsea for the morning's meal, and Kristoff, overhearing, says simply that if she ate well, then that is good. Michelle's heart catches, and she wonders quietly whether the man could possibly be thinking only of her physical condition. Kristoff asks Furman directly whether the household has been mindful of her health, and the butler's reply opens a fuller picture. Furman confirms with a knowing smile that the Lord himself was concerned about Lady Michelle's health and personally instructed the head chef. Kristoff asks when she went to bed, and the butler answers that he had her rest early the previous night, leaving Michelle to murmur in dawning wonder that all of it was for her health. The earlier question detonates anew in Kristoff's mind. Yesterday and rest and what time do you go to bed, each phrase suddenly recast. He realizes with creeping horror that if that question had truly sprung from concern over how worn out she looked, then the meaning was something else entirely. And even the weight of that meaningful look, he reflects, now reads completely differently. Michelle, watching him pale, marvels at how low and grave his voice has become, while the narration confirms he is reckoning with having only ever meant her physical condition. She approaches him directly to say that she had heard he was mindful of her health, and Kristoff stiffens and asks what it is. She explains haltingly that it is about the care he took with her meals, and he insists, sweating, that he has done nothing deserving of thanks. Inwardly mortified, Kristoff curses that she keeps saying unnecessary things, and tries to cut her off with Chelsea's name, but Michelle presses on luminously, adding that there is the matter of the doctor as well. Her eyes shining with sincere gratitude, she thanks him deeply and earnestly, leaving him momentarily stunned. Kristoff relents with quiet grace, admitting that though he has done nothing worthy of thanks, he will accept her words as sincerity. Michelle reflects soberly that she still does not know whether the rumors about him are true or false. Yet at the very least, she concludes, watching his back, she does not think he is a bad person, even granting there must be a reason he is called the lustful Marquis. Furman observes the exchange with a faint, knowing warmth in his weathered eyes. The butler privately marvels that seeing Lord Kristoff wear such an expression is a rare thing indeed. Kristoff stammers and asks Chelsea something, and Michelle, mistaking herself for the one addressed, exclaims "my lady" before the maid gently corrects her. Furman bows low and asks Kristoff to please take good care of her, addressing him formally as Lord Kristoff. Announcing his departure, the butler urges them both not to hesitate to inform him if anything should happen. Before taking his leave, Furman adds that he wishes also to convey his regards to the young master, leaving Michelle to echo the unfamiliar phrase in confusion. The words detonate, and Michelle gasps aghast at the mention of a young master. Kristoff, his back turned, confirms grimly that yes, he has heard the Marquis has one son. Michelle presses anxiously to know who exactly this young master is. His voice dropping low, Kristoff reveals that the boy's name is Jeremy, and that he will turn 5 this year. Michelle's face crumples with quiet hurt as she wonders whether he keeps the child away because he does not want to involve her with him. Composing herself, she asks evenly where the boy is now. Kristoff asks her why she wants to know, and she explains that since she will be staying here a while, it would be proper to greet him. Kristoff answers that Jeremy is currently at the villa and is scheduled to return in a few days. He adds with bitter irony that he does not even wish to introduce the boy to a woman he believes to be a fake. Michelle, taking his caution for tenderness, wonders aloud whether the Marquis might simply be an overprotective father, and resolves obligingly to avoid running into the child as much as possible. Kristoff recoils and protests that there is no need to go quite that far. He composes himself and offers a quiet apology, his hand at his neck. The narration steps back to observe that, even so, living in the same mansion makes avoiding all contact entirely a difficult thing. The scene shifts to the garden some mornings later, where Chelsea and Grace marvel at the lovely weather as Michelle delights in reading at her leisure in such a beautiful garden. The narration notes that only a few days remain until young Master Jeremy returns. Michelle reflects that she must be careful not to run into him by accident, though she quietly wishes she were at least allowed a short walk. She praises the tea as delicious and muses that it is best not to dig too deeply into other people's family matters, preferring not to get involved. A sudden commotion breaks the calm, voices calling "Hey, and where are you going?" as Chelsea recounts that the tea is grown in the region she and her mother are from. Chelsea offers to go check what is happening, while the household frets that nothing was supposed to occur today and a manservant dashes off toward the noise. Michelle reasons composedly that in situations like this it is better not to get involved, a rustle stirring in the hedge nearby. Her curiosity sharpens as she catches sight of something small among the leaves, a ball of fur she cannot quite place. The mystery resolves adorably as a small fluffy puppy peers up at her, and Michelle, overcome, gathers it into her arms with luminous joy. She realizes with a jolt that if the Marquis keeps a dog, then surely she has no choice but to indulge herself just this once. A small boy emerges from the greenery, blinking at her in wide-eyed surprise, another child glimpsed shyly behind him. Michelle freezes in mortified horror, caught red-handed cradling the puppy before the stranger's gaze. Recovering her composure with effort, she rises and greets the boy with a poised "It is a pleasure to meet you." She kneels to his level and asks the child's name, introducing herself warmly as Michelle Verdier. The boy answers shyly, confirming with a blush that he is Jeremy Dudevant. Michelle's smile freezes as the realization lands like a thunderclap that this is him, the very child she meant to avoid. So he really is the Marquis's son, she marvels, the truth she could scarcely believe now standing plainly before her. And yet, the narration lingers, something in the boy's bright, curious eyes makes her hesitate. Her composure dissolves into helpless adoration as she beholds what an incredibly adorable child he is. The boy stammers an and an ah, and Michelle's heart sinks as she remembers that young Master Jeremy was supposed to return only in a few days. Jeremy gazes up at her with shining, hopeful eyes and asks, breathlessly, whether she is his new mom. Michelle stiffens, her mouth opening soundlessly as the word catches in her throat. The question strikes her like lightning, and she reels in flustered disbelief at being called mom. Innocent and earnest, Jeremy reasons that if she is going to marry father, then she must be his mom. Michelle wavers, wondering whether she even has the right to call herself a mother, while privately conceding that marrying the Marquis really does mean exactly that. Her doubts deepen, weighed down by the knowledge that she has never given birth to a child and that circumstances might one day force her to leave the Marquis's household. She recalls that she was raised in an orphanage, the grand building rising behind her in memory. She remembers with quiet sorrow that she does not even know what her own real mother looks like. So how, she despairs, could she possibly be a good mother to anyone? Jeremy's hopeful face begins to fall as Michelle hesitates with her halting ah and His eyes brim with sudden tears as he asks, trembling, whether she is not his mother after all. The sight of the weeping child shatters her resolve, and the narration confirms she could not possibly bring herself to say she is not. Bowing her head, Michelle yields with a quiet "I am." She declares it warmly and fully that she is his new mother as Christophe, witnessing it all from across the garden, recoils aghast. Christophe falters out a stunned at the scene unfolding before him. The narration cuts to Michelle bowing deeply and apologizing with profuse sincerity. She recounts that the Marquis witnessed the whole scene with his own eyes, lamenting that despite telling herself she would not interfere in young Master Jeremy's affairs, she met him and immediately introduced herself as his mother. From Michelle's perspective, she protests inwardly that with the boy looking at her through such tearful eyes, she simply could not have said she is not. Christophe shakes his head and tells her gently that there is no need to apologize. He explains that Jeremy said it while looking happy, and that the boy told him she had spoken to him kindly. With a rare and genuine smile, Christophe thanks her sincerely. Michelle waves her hands and insists she did nothing special at all, and he replies that there really is no need for thanks, the narration noting it was all for the daughter of the real Michelle Verdier. The familiar misunderstanding resurfaces as Christophe deflates, sighing that it is to be expected as usual, then apologizes that they have not yet made any progress. The scene shifts as Jeremy comes knocking at Michelle's door, asking shyly whether she is done talking and wanting to talk with his mom a little more, while Michelle, delighted, invites him in. A flashback reveals Christophe leaning across a desk to ask Michelle, with unexpected gentleness, whether she could not indulge the boy a little, as she wonders whether such a thing is really allowed. Furman observes warmly that it seems Jeremy has taken a liking to her, and Christophe confirms it with a quiet yes. Michelle brightens and exclaims that if she is suitable she would be happy to, asking whether it would be inappropriate, while Christophe concedes that perhaps he had been overly cautious. The narration reflects that communication with the son who had once been guarded with such caution was now easily permitted, and so, at Sir Jeremy's request, the bond between them was allowed to grow. Michelle reads a storybook aloud to Jeremy, reciting how the saint healed the wounded prince, who thanked her deeply, then married her, and they lived happily ever after, as the boy declares the tale's end. Jeremy looks up and asks earnestly whether his mom, being a saint too, can use healing magic, leaving Michelle to falter with an uncertain Christophe appears quietly at the doorway, and Michelle wonders whether he has come to check on them or, perhaps, to keep an eye on them, while Jeremy reflects that his father is truly an amazing person. Jeremy explains with quiet pride that for the sake of the people living in this fief, his father works tirelessly every single day. Lingering shyly at the door, the boy confesses softly that he really respects his father, as Christophe listens, beginning a quiet eye that hangs unfinished in the air. Watching the small boy cling to her, Michelle reflects that he is only 5 years old, at an age when he still desperately needs affection. She quietly observes that Jeremy carries the loneliness of a child without a mother and with a father who is always too busy to be near. Gazing at the back of the boy's head, Michelle aches with the realization that he must have endured all of that solitude entirely on his own this whole time. She reasons that the servants have their own duties to attend to, and the maids as well, leaving no one to fill the empty hours. A sudden thought halts her midway as she presses a finger thoughtfully to her lips and wonders aloud about the maids. It dawns on her with mild astonishment that, now that she truly thinks about it, she has never once seen any maid other than Chelsea and Grace since the day she first arrived. Beaming up at her with bright, hopeful eyes, Jeremy confesses that he is no longer lonely now that his new mom has finally come to stay. The boy innocently muses about why he ever felt so alone before, leaving the question hanging sweetly in the air. The scene shifts as the narration reveals that Sir Jeremy said all of this with a warm smile, though his small face still carried an unmistakable trace of lingering sadness. Recounting the days that followed, Michelle notes that whenever she spent time with young Master Jeremy, she kept catching the Marquis repeatedly watching them from behind corners. Peeking past the column where Christophe lurks awkwardly, Jeremy bluntly remarks that being stared at like that is really uncomfortable. Tilting her head in genuine puzzlement, Michelle admits she has no idea what is going on inside the Marquis's mind, musing that instead of merely watching from afar, he ought to make the time to spend with Sir Jeremy directly. Startled mid-skulk, Christophe flinches violently as Michelle sighs his title in exasperation and mutters honestly under her breath. Pressing the matter with gentle insistence, Michelle tells him that if it truly matters to him this much, he is welcome to simply join them openly, while a flustered Christophe sputters that he was only passing by. Throwing up his hands in panicked denial, Christophe is met with Michelle flatly informing him that there is no need for excuses. Both of them freeze in startled embarrassment, hands raised, eyes wide, as the awkward standoff catches them equally off guard. A tense, wordless beat passes between the two as they stare at one another in mutual fluster. Lowering her hand with a resigned breath, Michelle offers a quiet apology, and Christophe stiffly concedes that in any case, it is fine. Brightening with sudden warmth, Michelle assures him that if the Marquis is with them, young Master Jeremy will surely be overjoyed, though Christophe hesitates that he is simply not used to doing things like this. Smiling radiantly amid drifting petals, Michelle gently reassures him that spending time with family isn't difficult at all. Struck silent by her words, Christophe gazes ahead as falling petals frame his quietly stunned expression. The scene shifts to Furman cheerfully ushering a reluctant Christophe along, insisting there is nothing wrong with enjoying tea at a relaxed pace sometimes, as Michelle calls out that young Master Jeremy is waiting and it is time to go. Gesturing graciously toward the flustered Marquis, Michelle announces to the boy that today his father will be joining them too, prompting Jeremy to whirl around in stunned disbelief. Reaching out to tenderly ruffle his son's hair, Christophe softly confirms it with a single yes, as a wide-eyed Jeremy shyly asks whether they can talk a lot together today. Kneeling tenderly before his son and resting a gentle hand atop his head, Christophe softly promises Jeremy that the two of them will talk a great deal from now on. The scene lingers on the Marquis's faint, unguarded smile mirrored by Jeremy's wide, glistening eyes, a fragile warmth blooming between father and son. Beaming radiantly, Jeremy thanks his mom, while Michelle quietly studies the Marquis and notes that all she did was invite his father, gently asking whether something is bothering him. Smiling warmly at the boy, Michelle remarks that it is strange for him to keep calling his own son, young master, prompting a flustered Jeremy to insist she simply call him Jeremy. Glancing nervously toward the lurking Marquis, Michelle hesitates with a, but, uncertain whether such familiarity is truly her place. Watching from behind with arms crossed, Kristoff gives a small, silent nod of permission, his stern composure softening just slightly. Lighting up with delight, Michelle relents and warmly agrees, settling the matter by calling the boy Jeremy as he glows with happiness. Gazing fondly at the pair, Kristoff murmurs that this arrangement is a compromise, then, watching Jeremy clasp Michelle's hand, quietly concedes the point to himself. The scene shifts to the bustling streets of the fief, where guards stand watch and laborers haul rolled goods past a steady stream of townsfolk going about their day. High above, a single ominous crack splinters across the clear blue sky with a sharp, glassy snap. Some days later, back at the estate, a voice cheerfully observes that Michelle's complexion has improved a great deal. Beaming amid a flourish of blossoms, Michelle gratefully reports that thanks to the delicious food she has been eating more, sleeping peacefully, and feeling truly well, and warmly thanks them. Peering around a doorframe, Jeremy spots the tender scene and calls out in surprise to his mother, while old Furman startles at the young master's sudden appearance. Leaning anxiously past the door, a worried Jeremy asks his mom whether she is all right. Smiling with serene reassurance, Michelle gently tells him there is no need to worry, explaining that the others were only checking to make sure nothing was wrong. Brightening with relief, Jeremy exhales happily as Furman muses, "Is that so?" beside an equally relieved attendant. Stepping forward with measured concern, Furman begins, "If that's the case," while Michelle blinks and Jeremy hesitates with a small The scene shifts to the training yard, where Michelle calls out tenderly for Jeremy to be careful not to get hurt as the boy crosses blades with his instructor. Fidgeting bashfully, Jeremy confesses that if he'd love for his mom to come watch his sword training, and the narration wryly notes there was no option called refusal. Grinning broadly, a blonde knight cheers the young master on and urges him to keep it up, as the narration introduces Leo, a knight of House Dudevant and Michelle's personal guard. Floating cheerfully above the scene, Michelle gushes that the Marquis is very strong, while Leo proudly insists there is no need for protection, though caution suits her constant strolling. Sweeping into a dramatic silhouette, Leo extols Kristoff's mastery of the sword and reveals that the Marquis also wields water element magic and can attack with ice, so that even among serving knights very few can defeat his lord. Beside the maid Grace, Michelle absorbs this as Grace adds that even within this fief there are areas where security is poor. The narration explains, over a comic flashback of bickering rulers, that because the region sits close to the border and teems with immigrants, disputes are frequent, which is precisely why its rulers tend to excel in martial arts. Puffing out his chest with pride, Jeremy boasts that his dad is the strongest of all and utterly amazing, revealing just how deeply the boy adores his father. Lowering his blade, Leo suggests they take a short break, but a fired-up Jeremy insists on going once more and calls out eagerly for one more round. In the parlor, an old maid offers Lady Michelle some tea, which she accepts gratefully, while Jeremy declares he wants to become like his father as soon as possible. Mid-swing in a flurry of motion sound effects, Jeremy presses his attack with a fierce ha, only for the unthinkable to begin unfolding in a single startled Whipping around in alarm as Grace claps a hand to her mouth, Michelle cries out Jeremy's name as the boy goes tumbling. Scrambling to the boy's side, Leo and Michelle anxiously ask whether he is all right, as Jeremy winces that he twisted his ankle. Bowing his head in deep shame, Leo apologizes to the young master, though Jeremy immediately insists that Leo is not at fault. Examining the swelling with careful fingers, Michelle gently warns Jeremy not to move as she notes the injury beginning to puff and bruise. The maids and Leo recoil in stunned disbelief, a sharp, hanging over them, as a soft radiant light blooms from Michelle's hands hovering over Jeremy's ankle. In tight, sweating close-up, Leo and Grace stare wide-eyed, the dawning realization seizing them with a breathless, "This is it." Springing up to test his foot, an astonished Jeremy marvels that he doesn't feel any pain at all, while Michelle quietly breathes her thanks that all is well. Reeling in shock with their faces frozen, Leo and Grace can barely process it as Jeremy beams that his mom really is an amazing saint and thanks her sincerely. The household erupts into frantic whispers, gasping that things have gone so far they must have sent another saint as a substitute, while Leo silently wonders whether they have finally realized she is the real Michelle Verdier, their expressions shifting all at once. Pressing a hand to her brow as a wave of fatigue washes over her, Michelle muses that she feels strangely exhausted, reasoning it must be because she hasn't used magic in a while. Masking it behind a bright smile, Michelle assures a worried Jeremy that nothing is wrong at all, though her strained eyes betray her as the boy anxiously asks if something is the matter. The scene shifts as Leo suggests they take a break and offers to bring some delicious tea, only for a panicked knight to come crashing through, bellowing for everyone to get to the entrance now because of the barrier. Bursting into chaos, a kneeling messenger cries out that there is a breach in the barrier as a monstrous winged silhouette looms behind the shattered, glass-like fracture. The scene shifts indoors as a grim-faced messenger kneels before the household, the heavy thud of dread settling over Kristoff, Leo, and the watching family. Halting in his tracks, Kristoff turns sharply as the messenger reports, "My Lord Marquis," that they have received word of a breach in the barrier. Against a backdrop of swarming beasts and wounded townsfolk, the messenger explains that the breach occurred above the checkpoint on the border between the Dudevant and Verdier regions, caused by an attack from magical beasts that slipped through the gap, leaving many injured. Eyes blazing with resolve, Kristoff declares that from this moment on he will personally take command and ride out to eliminate the magical beasts. Rattling off crisp orders, Kristoff directs the medical unit to prioritize the wounded and move at the rear, then commands Leo to stay at the palace with some knights and handle security, as Leo grimly answers, "Understood." Crouching to fix his son with a steady gaze, Kristoff firmly instructs Jeremy not to leave the palace, asking pointedly whether that is clear. Vaulting onto his horse amid drifting fur and snapping reins, Kristoff orders the force to move out at once, as Michelle calls after him to wait a moment and the gates swing open. Whirling toward Leo with sudden determination, Michelle announces she has a request, leaving a baffled Leo stammering while Grace ushers everyone inside. Fixing Leo with pleading, luminous eyes, Michelle implores him to take her with him to the checkpoint at the regional border. A barrage of frantic protests erupts, insisting she follow the Lord's orders and stay safe, demanding how anyone could bring her into a swarm of beasts, while Michelle calmly counters that she wants to help and can treat the injured immediately, drawing an absolute refusal. Tearing off on horseback with a triumphant "Go!" Michelle leaves the knights aghast. One spluttering that it's the worst idea he's ever heard and another stunned that the saint can even ride, as she cheerfully offers to simply go by herself. Eyes sparkling with reckless confidence, Michelle insists she's never tried riding before but thinks she can manage, while a horrified Leo cries that this is exactly why she mustn't. Spinning on her heel toward the stables, Michelle resolves to find a horse herself as Leo lunges after her with a desperate, "Hey, wait." Caving at last with a strained, fist-clenched grin, Leo concedes that he understands, but begs her to promise she'll ever leave his side, as Michelle thanks him brightly. Tying back her hair with breezy resolve, Michelle assures Jeremy not to worry, while the boy murmurs, "Mother," and Leo despairs in the background that he's going to get scolded. Resting a gentle hand atop Jeremy's head, Michelle tells him to wait for her and softly promises that his mother is an amazing woman. The scene shifts to a hushed exterior of the manor as a quiet voice answers, "Yes," and bids them please take care of themselves. In a sweeping wide shot, Leo leads a saddled horse with Michelle past the towering palace walls, the household watching as they set out into danger. The scene shifts to the ravaged battlefield, where torn earth and fallen bodies lie scattered in eerie, silent aftermath. Arriving amid the carnage, a wounded knight gasps in disbelief at the sight of Sir Leo, while Michelle scans the casualties and notes the lacerations and the strange discoloration creeping across their skin. Surveying the grim tally against a blood-stained wall, the report comes that there have been no fatalities, but 3 are critically injured and 12 wounded, and many of them have been poisoned. Knights brace amid fluttering toxic wings as the situation is laid bare, that one magical beast has been confirmed along with several magical insects whose scale dust carries a poisonous reaction, while the guard knights are already locked in combat. A dark, ominous close-up reveals the looming bulk of the magical beast, its scaled wings splayed across the panel amid jagged sound effects. Faltering mid-sentence, a sweating knight stares upward and stammers, "Wait, is that?" the words catching in his throat. Towering over the dwarfed knights with wings outstretched, the beast is revealed as a wyvern, its threat level classified as C rank. Knuckles tightening with unease, Leo marvels that there is only one wyvern, though they usually move in packs, and worse, that it appeared in a populated area, while Michelle declares they'll begin treating the injured at once and leave the wyvern to the knights. A wounded soldier weakly waves them off as the medics fret that they have treatment tools but cannot counter the poison. Kneeling beside a stricken man and raising both luminous hands, Michelle steadies herself to channel her power as Leo and the others look on, breath held. Soft radiant light pours from her palms and the wounds and the sickly discoloration begin vanishing before the knight's astonished eyes. Gasping with relief as the man stirs, Michelle gently assures him it's all right now and that he's safe, while the watching knights marvel that it's just as expected of her. The toxic insects suddenly swarm in a glittering flurry, and Leo whirls with his blade drawn, shouting for Lady Michelle as the danger closes in. Flashing a fearless grin amid the swirling swarm, Leo tells Michelle to take care of the injured while the knights handle the insects, and a grateful Michelle thanks him. The insects' numbers finally begin thinning under the knights' assault, but Leo grimly warns that unless they repair the breach in the barrier, this onslaught will never end. Standing resolute beneath the slain beast's massive corpse, Kristoff lowers his blade with piercing eyes as the cry rings out across the field that the wyvern has been defeated. Roaring with triumphant delight, Leo praises his lord's flawless victory as another knight cries out in relief for Lady Michelle. Without warning, a second monstrous beast erupts from the haze, its jaws gaping wide as a stunned voice gasps that yet another creature has appeared. Standing fearlessly beneath the descending wyvern, Kristoff raises a single hand as jagged ice explodes upward from the frozen earth. Whirling toward the chaos, a wide-eyed Michelle watches glittering crystals swallow the second beast in a violent bloom of frost. Breathless with disbelief, Michelle realizes that the magic tearing through the monster is unmistakably ice. Lowering his hand with cool composure, Kristoff notes that the wyvern had a partner all along, exactly as he had expected. Gazing up at him in dawning awe, Michelle understands without a shred of doubt that the figure before her is the Marquis himself. Striking again in an instant, he leaves the onlookers marveling that he wields high-level magic without ever chanting a single spell. The casting of magic normally demands a careful incantation, yet among the most seasoned users a rare few can shorten or omit it entirely for simple elemental spells. The ice the Marquis commands, however, is high-level magic drawn from converted water energy, the kind even decades-hardened mages can scarcely cast without an incantation. And beyond all of that, he unleashes it with such astonishing speed, a feat made all the more staggering by how young he still is. Glittering shards engulf the towering creature entirely, freezing the second beast solid where it stands. Staring in slack-jawed wonder, the knights breathe that he felled the second monster with complete and effortless ease. Radiating overwhelming power, Marquis Kristoff Dudevant turns toward Michelle and sharply demands to know why she is here at all. Rounding on his knight with icy severity, Kristoff reminds Leo that he abandoned his post, dragged her into danger, and demands to know precisely what he intended. Stepping forward to shield her guard, Michelle insists that she alone acted recklessly and that Leo was merely following her orders. Cutting through her excuses, Kristoff gravely warns that had he arrived even a moment later, she might have lost her life. Softening despite himself, he adds quietly that if anything had befallen her, Jeremy would have been left utterly heartbroken. A sudden memory flashes behind her eyes as Michelle recalls the wounded she had healed only moments earlier. Bowing deeply with overwhelming gratitude, a healed soldier thanks the saint endlessly for the treatment that spared his life. Roaring with triumphant joy, the knights praise their lord's flawless victory as another cries out in relief that the saint before them is the true one. Trembling with gratitude, the gathered villagers and household thank the saint endlessly, asking after her arm while she gently insists she is fine. Wincing through a fierce headache, Kristoff presses his temple as Michelle nervously asks whether he finally understands the truth. Cutting through the moment with cool urgency, Michelle declares the discussion must wait, since the breach in the barrier has to be sealed at once. Brushing aside their lingering doubt, Kristoff and Leo concede, even hypothetically, that she really was a saint all along. Explaining the danger plainly, Michelle warns that the breach is wide enough for magical beasts to slip through and that several saints must be summoned from the palace. Astonishing the entire group, Michelle calmly instructs Leo to cut a sliver from the tip of her finger to seal the breach herself. Erupting into protest, the knights cry that it is impossible, while Michelle quietly reminds them she alone maintained the kingdom's barrier for years. Lowering his sword in bewildered awe, Kristoff can only mutter a stunned as Michelle prepares her blood for the sealing. Pressing her bleeding fingertip forward, Michelle raises her hand toward the sky as luminous threads of light begin to bloom from a single drop. Streaming upward in glowing ribbons, the threads of light race toward the torn breach high above the checkpoint. Watching the radiance knit the sky shut, the knights breathe in disbelief that the threads of light are sealing the barrier before their eyes. Staring at the single small magic stone in her hand, the knights marvel that she could mend the breach entirely on her own. Flushing with dawning realization, Kristoff asks under his breath whether she truly accomplished such a feat alone. Closing her eyes with quiet certainty, Michelle answers yes, reminding him she has told him as much many times already. Smiling with serene composure, Michelle declares without a shred of doubt that she is the real Michelle Verdier, the saint famously branded the cruel saint. The scene opens on Chapter 5, where the murmuring crowd whispers in disbelief that the wicked Saint Michelle Verdier could possibly be this gentle woman. Eyeing the saint warily, the onlookers wonder aloud whether she is truly the woman the cruel rumors described, since she seems so different. Squinting through the lingering dust, a knight gasps in confusion at the figures approaching through the haze and demands to know what is going on. Riding in on horseback with imposing calm, Border Marquis Oscar Verdier greets his adoptive daughter, remarking that she really did come after all. Surveying the settled battlefield, the Marquis explains that he rushed over upon hearing of the breach, only to find the matter already resolved. Pressing her hands together anxiously, Michelle reports that the breach was sealed only moments ago and should remain stable for some time. Stroking his beard with knowing amusement, Oscar deduces that his daughter must have insisted on accompanying the others into danger. Turning toward the young lord, Christophe formally introduces himself as the head of House Dudevant and declares it an honor to meet the Marquis. Gesturing toward the frozen carcasses, Oscar raises the subject of the wyvern, noting that only this mated pair emerged from the breach. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, Oscar muses that wyverns usually travel in groups, though mated pairs sometimes split off in search of new hunting grounds. Gazing up at the mended sky, the group concludes that the beasts may have sensed the scent of humans through the flaw in the barrier. Praising the young Marquis evenly, Oscar calls defeating 2 wyverns at once an achievement worthy of high commendation, adding that vigilance must continue. Bowing his head with measured humility, Oscar apologizes for his late introduction, while Christophe replies that such praise from the Borderland Marquis is a great honor. Resting a proud hand near his daughter, Oscar entrusts her to the young lord, declaring that his daughter Michelle will be under his care. Staring blankly as the weight of it lands, Christophe falters over how to address her, beginning to stammer despite himself. Wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, Christophe privately concedes that she really is the genuine article, the true Michelle. Tilting her head in innocent confusion, Michelle asks what the two of them could possibly mean by the real one. Throwing her arm up in flustered defense, Michelle insists that everyone in the Marquis's household treated her very kindly, alarming her father at once. Swaying suddenly on her feet, Michelle's composure cracks as a faint cry escapes her lips. Lunging to catch her, Oscar seizes his collapsing daughter as Christophe cries out her name in alarm. Steadying her against him, Oscar realizes with grim understanding that rebuilding the barrier has drained her, while Michelle weakly insists she is fine. Stepping forward with quiet resolve, Oscar asks the young lord to allow Michelle to return to the castle and recover. Smiling down at his exhausted daughter, Oscar tells her tenderly that she did well and ought to get some rest. Flushing softly in her father's arms, Michelle gazes up at him as the narration drifts toward what comes next. Riding home in a carriage prepared for her failing health, Michelle reflects that the wyvern attack born of the broken barrier ended peacefully. Beaming at the doorway, little Jeremy and the maids welcome her home, the elderly maid and butler Furman watching warmly. Kneeling to embrace the boy rushing into her arms, Michelle recalls how she and her Lord Marquis returned together to the Dudevant family's castle. Hovering with gentle concern, a voice suggests it might be better for her to rest a while longer. Settling onto the sofa with a grateful smile, Michelle thanks them for their worry but assures them she has rested enough and feels fine now. Studying her face from across the table, Christophe admits with faint surprise that her complexion does look much better. Closing her eyes warmly, Michelle thanks her Lord Marquis and Jeremy, adding that everyone in the household has treated her with great kindness. Lowering his gaze with quiet resolve, Christophe murmurs that if that is truly the case, then all is well, clenching a fist in private resolve. Bowing his head with unexpected gravity, Christophe tells her sincerely that he apologizes for his behavior. Confessing his fault plainly, he admits that after misunderstanding her, he spoke harshly and acted rudely, even calling her a fraud. Waving her hands in gentle protest, Michelle assures him that he was not the only one misled by the rumors. Turning her face aside, Michelle confides that she herself knew well that rumors can never truly be trusted. Leaning forward with sudden curiosity, Michelle asks whether the rumors about her Lord Marquis are, like the ones about her, completely unfounded. Lowering his eyes with a wry sigh, Christophe acknowledges that the title, Lecherous is widespread. Fixing him with a perceptive look, Michelle reveals that something about the Dudevant castle has puzzled her, and asks plainly whether he is in truth simply poor with women. Recalling the strangely small staff and his rigid habits, Michel observes that he keeps to his study and bedroom alone at night and never visits women by day. Reflecting on the conspicuous absence of any feminine presence, the narration notes how striking the complete lack of women around him truly was. Picturing him beside her, Michel recalls that even when he stood with her, he always kept a fixed and careful distance. Remembering his earlier conduct, Michel senses that his behavior was less deliberate rejection than something he could not control. Confirming her suspicion, the narration reveals his reaction was not aversion by choice but an involuntary one. Bowing her head in apology, Michel explains that the royal order was meant to keep her bound within the country, and tells him she had no intention of marrying in the first place. Lifting his eyes to meet hers, Christophe quietly tells her to raise her head. Steepling his fingers with dark humor, Christophe assures her there is no need to worry, since the only true bastard in this affair is the king. Bowing again in gratitude, Michel thanks him, saying she now understands the king's hidden intentions. Explaining the trap calmly, Christophe describes the system known as a white marriage. Laying out the mechanism, the narration explains that under a white marriage a couple may annul the union and return everything to zero if they share no physical relationship for a full year. Reading the scheme aloud, Christophe reveals the king meant to bind her within the country by wedding her to a man incapable of touching women, planning to retie her to the crown prince once the storm had passed. Burying his face in his hand with weary disgust, Christophe declares the prince utterly hopeless, and Michel agrees that it is truly so. Lifting his head with renewed purpose, Christophe says that with all of that in mind, they should discuss what comes next. Folding his hands gravely, Christophe warns that this marriage will bring him no benefit, since for a man poor with women it would only be a burden. Considering his words, Michel concedes quietly that he makes a valid point, but adds that there is something to weigh against it. Resting his chin on his knuckles, Christophe notes that ignoring a royal order could be read as rebellion against the crown, and that he would prefer to avoid trouble. Meeting his gaze steadily, Michel proposes that they agree, given Jeremy's situation, to make it a contract marriage instead. Narrowing his eyes thoughtfully, Christophe says there is one thing he wishes to confirm first, and asks whether she wishes to return to being a saint. Pressing the question further, he asks whether she would wish to become the crown prince's fiancée once more. Throwing up both hands in horrified refusal, Michel cries that it is impossible and declares an emphatic, "No, thank you." Recalling a letter with a wry expression, Christophe reveals that he received a warning from her adoptive father that very morning, baffling Michel. Reading the stern words aloud, Christophe relays the Marquis's declaration that the Verdiers will not allow Michel to be sold off to the royal family. Letting the words settle, the panel lingers on a single reassurance: do not worry. Fixing her with a steady look, Christophe tells Michel that if she does not want such a fate, he will not hand her over to the royal family. Reasoning coldly, Christophe explains that becoming enemies with the Verdier family would be far more troublesome than opposing the crown, and that he wished to confirm her wishes first. Flushing and waving him off, Michel stammers that nothing is wrong as Christophe asks what the matter is. Catching herself, Michel admits she was simply surprised, while Christophe announces he intends to conclude the marriage immediately despite the deadline still being distant. Explaining his reasoning brightly, Christophe notes that during an engagement phase things remain ambiguous, so no one would dare make a reckless demand to hand over the wife. Tilting her head in earnest surprise, Michel asks whether such a plan is truly acceptable. Smiling faintly across the divide, Christophe says he wants to cut off any attempt at exploitation, and Michel quietly answers that she understands. Turning toward the doorway with relief, Christophe greets the butler Firmin, who replies that he will do whatever his Lord Marquis thinks best. Presenting a sealed document with practiced calm, Firmin announces that this is the marriage contract. Glancing at the prepared papers, Michel remarks that he is very well prepared, while Christophe notes he has already signed his part and only her signature remains. Reaching for the document timidly, Michel asks whether she may borrow a pen, and Firmin offers her one to use. Gazing into the open case with wide eyes, Michel marvels at the beautiful pen set with a gemstone exactly the color of her eyes. Watching across the room, Christophe and Firmin observe as Michel bends quietly over the contract to sign. Studying her signature with a low hum, Christophe considers the completed page. Reaching out abruptly, Christophe instructs her to hand the pen over at once. Lifting it toward him in confusion, Michel asks what he means as he takes the case in hand. Holding the case out toward her, Christophe declares that this is for her, leaving Michel to ask what, in bewilderment. Reminding her of their arrangement, Christophe says that since the marriage is purely contractual, there will be no ring and no wedding ceremony. Turning the elegant pen in his fingers, Christophe tells her to consider it a commemorative substitute, since he understands perfectly what kind of marriage this is. Holding the gift up to the light, Michelle reflects that she never expected a ring or ceremony, yet never imagined he would prepare a keepsake for her. Clutching the pen tenderly to her chest, a blushing Michelle thanks him warmly and promises that she will treasure it. Shifting awkwardly, Christophe brings up one more thing, regarding the way she keeps calling him, my Lord Marquis. Glancing aside with reddening ears, Christophe admits that even if it is only formal, calling each other husband and wife while she addresses him so seems a little strange. Recalling a familiar echo, Christophe muses that not long ago, somewhere else, someone said something very similar to him. Flashing back fondly, the memory surfaces of little Jeremy declaring how strange it is to call your husband, my Lord Marquis. Smiling quietly to himself, Christophe lets the recollection soften his expression. Lowering her eyes with an amused smile, Michelle agrees, privately noting that father and son really are alike. Beaming with sudden resolve, Michelle declares that starting today she will call him by something else, leaving Christophe to brace himself. Settling on a title with cheerful finality, Michelle announces she will call him, Your Grace, and a flustered Christophe sputters in protest. Standing before the grand estate gates, the household waves it off as fine while Christophe grudgingly accepts the new name. The scene shifts to the distant church, where an enraged voice curses and demands to know what the saints and clergy are even doing. Slamming his hand against the wall, the king thunders for the magical beast looming over the capital to be dealt with and the barrier repaired by any means necessary. Inside the palace corridors, panicked attendants scramble as the saints and guards rush to respond to the crisis. Flinging out an arm in fury, the king orders an urgent message sent to House Dudevant and a fast horse prepared, lamenting that he should never have let Michelle go. Narrowing his eyes with calculating malice, the king reflects that Alphonse and Stephanie are nothing more than empty titles, easy to manipulate, and that he can still fabricate a reason to summon Michelle back. Bursting through the doors in a panic, Prince Alphonse shouts for Stephanie and demands to know whether she is present. Reclining with serene confidence, the new Grand Saint Stephanie Lightencourt answers smoothly that she is here, Your Highness. Pressing her urgently, Alphonse asks whether she understands the gravity of the current situation, and she replies that of course she does. Smirking with venomous pride, Stephanie scoffs that there is no way she, the first saint, cannot accomplish whatever that orphan girl managed to do. Grinning with relief, Alphonse exclaims that this is exactly right. Sweeping Stephanie into a dramatic embrace and pointing toward the breach, Alphonse proclaims that they will depart with the saint and overcome this crisis together. Gazing out the window with a troubled expression, Michelle stands unaware as Chapter 5 draws to its close. The scene shifts into Prince Alphonse's memory, and the narration recalls his very first meeting with Michelle. It happened just after she finished her noble education in the Verdier household and first arrived at the royal capital. Studying the fair-haired girl, Alphonse privately concedes that so this is Michelle Verdier, and though she was originally a commoner, her appearance is far from unpleasant. He reasons coolly that it is, in any case, a political marriage, so there is no need to expect anything more from it than that. The narration recounts that at first, as far as the king was concerned, Alphonse felt no particular dissatisfaction, understanding the union was merely a means to contain the girl of enormous magical power. Yet, the narration notes with quiet foreboding, it seems those around him did not share his measured opinion. Murmuring behind fans, the nobles lament they cannot accept royal blood being mixed with a commoner's, calling it truly lamentable that such a girl became fiancée to the crown prince. They insist pointedly that Prince Alphonse deserves a woman far more radiant and beautiful, the words settling into the boy's wide, uncertain eyes. The narration confesses that as he heard such remarks repeated endlessly by ministers and retainers, Alphonse himself gradually began to believe Michelle was unworthy of him. Rounding on her with folded arms, the indignant prince coldly demands to know why she never attends any of the parties. Shrinking under his glare, Michelle apologizes and explains her saintly duties have been numerous lately, leaving him to sputter a disbelieving busy. He scoffs inwardly that all the other saints attend parties and soirees constantly, so there is no way she alone could be the only one too busy. His temper rising, Alphonse demands to know what that plain appearance is meant to be, asking whether she does not even try to look a little more beautiful. He fumes that she shows no awareness of her position as the crown prince's fiancée, then bitterly concludes that he sees exactly how things stand now. Twisting resentment into certainty, Alphonse decides she must be just as dissatisfied with the engagement to him as he is with her. The whispering courtiers gasp at the thought, one hissing how insolent she is, another snapping furiously that she is engaged specifically to him. Baring his teeth as his face contorts with fury, Alphonse seethes that she seemed to look down on him, and worse, that she was originally nothing but a commoner. The narration recalls that on one occasion the prince marched directly to the king and demanded his engagement to Michelle be annulled. Fixing his son with a heavy-lidded, weary stare, the king rejects the request outright, exactly as expected. Turning the memory over at last, Alphonse grasps the truth he had missed, that it was never that Michelle disliked the engagement, but that Michelle was, in fact, the grand saint. The narration continues that Michelle was confident the engagement would never be annulled, and thus dared to carry on her unfaithful behavior. Alphonse convinces himself that yes, this must be it, since that is exactly what an arrogant woman like her would think. He reasons bitterly that she is engaged to him, the crown prince, and therefore has no right whatsoever to feel dissatisfied. While he brooded this way, an accusation reached him from Stephanie, who had long harbored feelings for him, and at that evening party he decided alone to annul his engagement to Michelle. The scene snaps to the present as a frantic voice cries out for His Highness, jolting the wide-eyed prince from his thoughts. Amid the chaos of the breach, attendants call the prince over from every side while another voice reports that yet more injured people have been found. Barking orders through his rising panic, Alphonse demands to know why the saints cannot keep up, then commands that the most severely wounded be treated at once. The narration recalls that the last time Alphonse witnessed Michelle's healing magic, the wounds simply vanished in an instant before his eyes. Grasping at his fading options, Alphonse concludes that if that is the case, then their last remaining hope is Stephanie. Clutching her face in shrieking horror, the new Grand Saint wails to know why she of all people must do such filthy, degrading work. Rounding on the cowering attendants, Stephanie screams that her magical power has long since run dry and demands to know what more they could possibly want from her. Reeling back in disbelief, Alphonse stammers that this is impossible, then insists desperately that surely there must still be something left to do. Standing frozen amid the fallen and the wounded, the sweating prince slowly grasps the full scale of the disaster surrounding him. Clutching his head as his composure shatters completely, Alphonse cries out in raw despair to know why it ever came to this. The scene shifts to Michelle standing serene at a moonlit window, hands clasped in quiet prayer, wholly untouched by the ruin unfolding in the capital. The tranquil study of the Dudevant estate returns as the butler Furman announces his arrival, apologizing to his lord for the delay. Rising with an easy smile before the watching Michelle, Christophe apologizes for summoning her so suddenly and informs her that the marriage procedures have been completed successfully. Blushing faintly amid drifting petals, Michelle marvels in wide-eyed wonder that this means, from today onward, the two of them are officially husband and wife. Sliding the morning paper across the table with its grim headline of the barrier's collapse in the capital, Christophe asks whether she has read it, while a flustered Michelle stammers that she feels a little embarrassed. The narration closes on the towering barrier fracturing overhead, explaining that the breach above the capital was provisionally sealed by all the saints combined, yet the shortage of magical energy remains, so small cracks keep opening and closing across it still. Reflecting soberly on the aftermath, Michelle explains that the true problem was the flying monster from the very first breach, and though it was defeated, the casualties were many. She reasons calmly that since these are only minor cracks, at most small magical beasts can slip through, so the situation is safe for the time being. Turning grave, Christophe notes that all the saints joined the healing, yet many knights and residents who were slow to evacuate were still badly wounded. His hand tightening at his knee, he adds gravely that some of the injured never received sufficient treatment, and permanent aftereffects are said to remain for a few of them. Gazing out the window with quiet longing, Michelle catches herself wishing she had been there to save the wounded, then chides herself for such an arrogant thought. The narration steadies her with a hard truth, that no matter how vast one's magical power may be, it is simply impossible to save every single person. Sliding a fresh letter from its envelope, Christophe remarks that the barrier affair has drawn heavy criticism upon the royal family, exactly as he had expected. He explains, pressing the sealed paper to the table, that early that very morning a letter arrived bearing the mark of the king himself. Framed against his distant castle, the aged monarch's message proves entirely predictable, withdrawing the marriage order, annulling the engagement, and issuing an urgent summons for Michelle to appear at the palace. A dark aura swells around the seething Michelle as Christophe watches, gently urging her to please calm down a little. Folding his arms with cool composure, Christophe assures her he has already sent an official reply and there is nothing to worry about, while a curious Michel asks what response he gave. Confessing with a wry glint that although the man irritates him, he is still the king of the country, Christophe says he sent an exceedingly polite reply, leaving Michel to marvel that he calls the king merely that man. Sipping her tea with a delicious little sigh, Michel privately reasons that no reply from him could possibly be as blunt and straightforward as she fears. The gist of the letter surfaces, and Christophe muses with mock reverence just what exactly could be inside that splendid head crowned by His Majesty's radiant face, as Michel chokes on her tea. He continues with elaborate courtesy that his own humble intellect cannot begin to imagine it, though surely it must be filled with dazzling jewels, while the narration dryly labels it rudeness wrapped in excessive politeness. Springing up in alarm, Michel demands whether such a reply is truly safe, fretting that one wrong step could easily be branded lèse-majesté. Grinning darkly beside her horrified father, the Marquis offers that if it comes to that they could simply separate Verdier territory and declare independence, prompting Michel to beg him not to say such things where her adoptive parents might take them seriously. The scene softens to the present as Michel bows her head and thanks Christophe sincerely for rejecting His Majesty's request, adding that his refusal helped her as well. Waving the gratitude away with a bashful little smile, Christophe murmurs no, no, insisting he only did it because he wanted to. Gazing up at him with luminous, shining eyes, Michel adds that it was also thanks to the healing magic he knows she possesses. The scene closes on Christophe standing over her with quiet assurance, reporting that in the end they suffered hardly any loss of life at all, even among the civilians. Softening into a rare, sincere smile, Christophe tells Michel plainly that he is truly grateful to her, leaving the wide-eyed saint momentarily speechless. Pressing a hand to her chest, Michel marvels that healing such an enormous number of people alone and repairing the barrier besides makes his power, in his words, honestly terrifying. He reasons that when he compares her feat to the ruin that befell the capital, he can fully understand why the king is so unwilling to let her go. Tilting her head modestly, Michel demurs with a faint, "Ah no," as Christophe asks whether the power she wields is something she was simply born with. The narration answers through her memory, explaining that the light power of a saint is quite different from innate magical energy, growing gradually through prayers offered day after day. Watching her clasped hands, Christophe observes that she is surely still continuing that practice even now, while Michel admits quietly that she merely has a little more magical energy than most. Leaning forward with dawning admiration, Christophe notes that even after coming here, no longer bound by any saintly duty, she has continued to pray every single day without fail. Meeting her startled eyes with quiet certainty, Christophe declares that if that daily accumulation of countless days is the source of her power, then it is the fruit of what she cultivated with her own 2 hands. A memory rises unbidden of poor commoners turned cruelly away from the church, one voice demanding why a mere common woman should be treated so simply for holding a little more magic. The narration lets the thought settle bitterly, that a power left unused is nothing more than a treasure abandoned to rust. Another memory surfaces of a small tearful child clutching her hand, whispering a trembling thank you to the saint who healed her. Tears slipping quietly down her cheek, Michel answers Christophe with a soft, overwhelmed yes, the weight of his words reaching something deep within her. Around the tea table, the household insists warmly that to them what she did was nothing short of a miracle, though a flustered Michel protests that this is surely an exaggeration. Sliding closer with quiet resolve, Michel confesses that there is actually a small request she would like to make, and Christophe asks whether something is troubling her. Beaming radiantly with a hand to her chest, Michel declares that if any of the Marquis's knights are wounded, she wishes to be allowed to treat them personally. Christophe can only manage a startled, huh, as the luminous saint bows her head, the request catching the entire room off guard. The scene cuts to the king slumped and clutching his crown in disbelief, gripping the polite reply as he chokes out that this was completely unexpected. The narration reframes the man before us, Christophe Dudevant, secretly called the Lecherous Marquis, though in truth he harbors a deep and abiding hatred toward women. For that very reason, the narration recounts, the king had assumed that if the royal family demanded Christophe present his wife, he would gladly surrender her as a relief from an unwanted burden. The scene closes on the king's dawning ruin, realizing that even an irritating wife would provoke a man's anger, yet Christophe was ordered to return her the instant the marriage was registered in obedience to a royal command. Swirling his wine with bitter reflection, the king concedes to himself that perhaps he rushed things a little. He reasons that they will simply wait until matters calm down, let a year or two pass, then submit the request again and return to the original plan. His scheming is shattered as an attendant bursts through the doors crying out for His Majesty, startling the wine from his hand. Sputtering in affronted shock, the king demands to know whether entering without knocking is not an act of disrespect, while the frantic attendant snaps that this is no time for such remarks. Sweeping a hand toward the procession of veiled saints, the attendant reminds him that their magical power is currently spent entirely on maintaining the barrier. Leaning in with sweat beading down his face, the attendant delivers the blow that using any healing magic is, for now, completely impossible. The realization lands as the king stammers that he had forgotten, the wrench of it twisting his features. The scene sinks into shadow as the beleaguered monarch cries out into the dark to know why, in heaven's name. Clutching his crown and doubling over his throne, the king wails to know whether these disasters truly mean to keep piling up on him without end. The scene shifts to a sunlit terrace where two small figures sit at tea, far from the capital's ruin. Lowering her cup with serene malice, the mother observes that without their intervention the royals are simply destroying themselves. The grim headlines spread beside her. Studying the same papers, the mustachioed marquis agrees that yes, it is so, though he muses that watching it unfold like this feels a touch boring. A teacup rattles into its saucer as a third voice chimes in that yes, it completely agrees. Pressing a hand to his cheek, the marquis frets that Michelle is kind by nature, and if they push things too far she might come to dislike them. His composure cracking, the marquis wails that if Michelle ends up hating him he will really and truly cry, while the mother offers with a gentle smile that perhaps they should teach the royals their lesson little by little instead. The scene closes on the scattered newspapers and the marquis's cold, curling smile as he resolves that the royals will come to realize for themselves, slowly and mercilessly, just what kind of enemy they have made. Kristoff stands before his assembled knights and asks to reintroduce someone, presenting her as the former saint who aided them with healing during the Wyvern battle. Then, with perfect composure he declares that her name is Michelle and that she is his wife. He adds pointedly that this arrangement was based on her own proposal, while Michelle stands frozen beside him, silently screaming the word wife. He informs the ranks that when they suffer serious injuries during missions, she will perform healing magic upon them. The scene shifts to the other day, when Kristoff had asked her warily whether she truly received healing herself. Michelle beams and cries yes, and he admits it helps enormously but wonders whether this is really acceptable. She throws her arms up, declaring that those who do not work do not eat and that treating them will conveniently sharpen her own magic besides. Seated behind his desk, Kristoff rules that healing will be limited to serious injuries only, so the knights do not grow too dependent. He reasons coolly that enduring pain is itself a necessary form of training, and the tiny chibi Michelle blinks and murmurs that she sees. Back before the knights, Michelle introduces herself warmly, saying that though she is not strong she would be glad to help everyone. The knights marvel that this is exactly what they expected of His Grace, who never leads them into battle without reason. They whisper that not only did a beautiful woman appear, she even spoke to them kindly, while another mutters uneasily that she is surely the evil saint everyone discusses. An older knight snaps back that he is an idiot, demanding whether he forgot she raised the entire barrier single-handedly in the Wyvern battle. Kristoff interrupts with cool authority, warning that titles and ranks do not matter but that minor injuries fall outside the scope of healing. He tells them plainly not to rely on her excessively simply because she is kind. The knights reel, whispering whether this is truly the same aloof, women-shunning Lord Kristoff who just called himself kind to women. Michelle waves her hands nervously as one knight laughs that Lord Sorman had called Kristoff the Lecherous Marquis back in the capital. Untroubled, Michelle tells them that if anyone is currently injured, they should inform her without hesitation. One knight raises a trembling hand and asks whether an old injury would still be all right, and she answers that as long as there was no amputation it should be fine. The knight's eyes widen with desperate hope as he stammers then, before crying out whether she could heal Sir Jack's arm. The knight explains that Sir Jack was injured protecting a mother and child from a bandit attack, and has barely been able to move his left arm since. He laments that they could have asked a saint of the church in the royal capital, but the required donations were far too expensive. Michelle listens with wide, glistening eyes as the weight of the story settles over her. She murmurs quietly that so that is how it is, while flashbacks show the wounded arm and the impossible price demanded in coin. The scene shifts to Michelle asking whether Sir Jack still continues his duties as a knight with only one working arm. Sir Jack himself grins and confirms it, saying it was fortunate amid the misfortune that the injury was not to his dominant arm. He adds that they somehow still allow him to remain on active duty, though another knight interjects but that day something happened. The scene shifts to a tavern, where a shocked comrade had once demanded whether Jack was truly leaving knighthood. Jack, seated calmly at the bar, replies only that he said it might happen. He recalls that in the recent Wyvern battle he was excluded from the extermination unit and assigned instead to guard the castle. He reasons that with this arm he would surely have been a burden, and his friend answers softly that he understands. The comrades protest fiercely that no one thinks that way, that guarding the castle was an important mission too, and that he does his job perfectly even with that arm. Jack counters that healing only grows more difficult the more time passes, so even gathering the money and requesting a church saint would likely be futile now. He confesses that 2 years ago he resolved to live carrying this arm with him, before trailing off into a heavy butt. A single tear slides down his face in the dim light. Under lantern light, Jack admits he has grown weaker recently and asks quietly how long he will even be able to remain a knight, wondering whether it might be better to step aside. Back in the present, his comrades urge him not to let this rare opportunity slip, then round on him in disbelief, demanding whether he was even listening and reminding him he once said the very same thing. They cry out in exasperation, demanding to know why on earth he is hesitating now, while Jack can only stammer a faltering but. The knights erupt, insisting they will not let him retire after beating them, each shouting that they have never once won a training match against Sir Jack. Kristoff and Michelle watch the uproar from the side as an overwhelmed Jack manages only a stunned "You guys." Michelle turns her luminous eyes toward him and asks him gently, simply, whether he can do it. Michelle beams with radiant warmth and tells him simply to leave it to her. Kristoff turns to the wavering knight and declares, "Very well then, Jack," while the man stares back in astonishment. He commands with quiet authority that Jack step forward. The scene shows the enormous scale of the moment as Jack approaches the couple before the assembled ranks. Michelle tells him kindly that it is fine to stay as he is, though if he wishes to see the scar vanish entirely he may take his clothes off. The knights erupt at once, some shouting "All right Jack, take off your clothes," another crying "Ha," someone bellowing "Take them off." Kristoff snaps that there is enough noise and no need to remove anything, ordering them coldly not to show Michelle anything strange, while the chastened knights mutter that they went a bit too far. Michelle bows her head with a faint blush and tells Jack that then, if he will allow her, she will begin. She lays her luminous hands upon his injured shoulder as a sweating Jack watches in disbelief. Kristoff observes the scene in silence, his expression unreadable. Michelle privately notes that his condition is far worse than she expected, that even unable to use one hand he made tremendous efforts to keep serving, still in his prime yet forced to endure such an injury. She takes in the anxious, hopeful faces surrounding him and reflects that on top of everything he is loved this much by everyone. Her resolve crystallizes as her power flares, and she thinks that without a doubt she wants to heal him. The three of them stand encircled by the breathless, watching knights. Jack glances back at her, wide-eyed and sweating, as the warm light begins to fade. He slowly clenches his fist, and a stunned voice whispers that it is moving. Then Jack throws his arm up and cries out in astonished joy that it is moving, while the knights roar in amazement. The comrades crowd around him weeping with relief, calling out "Thank goodness Jack" and simply his name again and again. Michelle explains cheerfully that complete healing was not possible in a single session and a little rehabilitation will be needed, but after 1 or 2 more treatments he will fully recover. Overcome, Jack presses a trembling hand to his chest and asks her, barely daring to hope, whether he can truly still continue as a knight. Michelle smiles softly and answers of course, while a tearful Jack clenches his healed fist and stammers his thanks again and again. Surrounded by his overjoyed comrades, Jack grips her hands and weeps his gratitude, and Michelle gently promises that she will keep caring for him from now on as well. Kristoff watches the pair with an unexpectedly soft expression, a faint smile touching his lips. The narration shifts as Michelle recalls going on to heal the many knights who had been suffering from various physical ailments. The scene settles onto a park bench afterward, where Kristoff asks whether she is all right and Michelle chirps a bright reassurance, addressing him as "Your Grace." The chibi Michelle admits she is a little tired but happy that everyone was pleased, and Kristoff replies quietly that he sees, apologizing for pushing her so hard. The knights beam with their old wounds gone, and Kristoff reflects that the doctors had told them their injuries would never fully heal, yet even so they had kept serving this fief to this day. Michelle listens intently as Kristoff turns thoughtful and begins to speak of Jack in particular. He recounts that several months after the injury 2 years ago, Jack once traveled to a church in the royal capital seeking a cure. Michelle blinks in confusion with a soft huh. Kristoff reveals that despite the pilgrimage, Jack's arm was still unable to move even after he returned. A dawning unease crosses Michelle's face as she asks whether Jack was truly sent back because the donations were not sufficient. Kristoff says it was not only that, recalling that around that time a certain rumor began to spread, whispering that the Grand Saint demanded enormous donations, spent her nights in riotous revelry, and was called the Cruel Saint. He muses pointedly that looking back, it feels as though someone deliberately and maliciously tried to tarnish the Grand Saint's reputation, while the shadow of Stephanie looms behind a stricken Michelle. The tiny Michelle pales as Kristoff adds that even after returning home, Jack never gave up, training until he could crush bandits with a single hand. He explains that because this latest extermination campaign was extraordinarily dangerous, the injured, Jack among them, were assigned to guard the castle. The wounded knights stand together from behind as Kristoff reflects on how deeply that assignment must have wounded their pride. He acknowledges that they understand the reasoning, but insists the injured cannot be sent to the front lines, since the mind is one thing and emotions another. That, he says, is why he wishes to say it once more, for the healing of these men. Kristoff bows deeply before the seated Michelle and tells her that he thanks her from the very bottom of his heart. The jeweled brooch at Michelle's collar gleams as she lowers her gaze, the weight of Kristoff's gratitude settling over her. Kristoff presses a hand to his chest and tells her warmly that from now on as well, he will be able to protect this fief together with his knights. Michelle reflects that ever since she came here, this person has given her kind words whenever something happens, that he truly sees her and looks at her, unlike the cold court she left behind. Overcome with quiet joy, she clasps her hands to her chest and tells him that she is happy too, that she was able to be of use. The scene shifts to the royal capital, where frantic voices order the injured moved to the infirmary and those who had close contact quarantined 2 days in the Eastern Tower. Chaos engulfs the halls as attendants cry that the infirmary is already full, that medical supplies are running out, and demand to know the status of provisions. High above the turmoil, Prince Alphonse slumps at his desk with his head in his hands while an aide reads grimly from a report. The aide explains that they had barely contained the chaos from the magic beasts when magic explosion disease swept through the capital in the blink of an eye. Alphonse learns that nearly half the palace staff are already infected, that even his father the king collapsed yesterday, and that he himself has not slept for 4 days handling countermeasures. The narration darkens as palace affairs cease to function and the governance of the entire country begins grinding to a halt. Public resentment mounts toward an explosion, and Alphonse groans that his own head is about to burst as well. He presses a trembling hand to his brow and admits that ever since he annulled his engagement with Michelle and expelled the Grand Saint from her position, nothing has gone right. Papers scatter through the air as Alphonse wonders bleakly where exactly he went wrong, and an aide beside him murmurs a puzzled ahem. The pair look up to see countless large sheets of paper drifting down over the capital, and someone asks whether somebody is scattering pamphlets. An attendant rushes in crying that this is extremely serious, while a baffled Alphonse wonders what pamphlets could possibly be about at a time like this. The aide reports that pamphlets like these are being scattered all across the streets of the royal capital. Alphonse seizes one and reads its inflammatory headlines aghast, the darkness lurking within the royal family and the church, and why was the Grand Saint falsely accused, demanding to know who wrote it and what waiting for the next issue could mean. A dark-haired attendant tries to calm him, insisting it is just nonsense and that there could never have been a false accusation to begin with, while Alphonse sputters over what they even mean by the phrase. She reasons that if it had truly been a false accusation, such talk would never have surfaced, and admits uneasily that every testimony she gathered against the saint was nothing but bad stories about Michelle. Alphonse clutches the pamphlet, sweating, and insists once more that there is no way there could be a false accusation at all, the denial ringing increasingly hollow. The scene shifts several days after the Night Order's treatment, and Michelle, luminous and composed at her tea, softly asks whether the unfamiliar woman is a new maid. Kristoff confirms it, explaining that now the marriage is registered, invitations addressed to her will soon arrive in great number. He thought they would need young maids versed in the latest fashions to attend tea parties and gatherings, and so decided to hire 2 more. The mansion has had no lady of the house for years, he notes, so Chelsea and Grace are not well versed in high society. Kristoff assures her that, as promised, he will not force her to attend events, and that participation is entirely her choice. Wryly he admits he cannot serve as an escort, since being surrounded by women is unbearable to him, so events requiring a partner would be difficult. Michelle, quietly amused, confesses that to be honest she has no intention of entering society at all. She adds that there are only 2 maids, one always assigned to serve her, thanking Grace as her tea is poured. If more women in the house lightens their burden, she says, then this is a good chance to gradually grow used to it. Christophe murmurs, with rare candor, that even he does not think it right to remain like this forever. The matter of the new maids was entrusted to Firmin, he explains, and he will try, as much as possible, not to meet them. Michel tells him warmly that if so, he must please not overexert himself, and he thanks her, his composure softening. With visible unease he touches his collar and asks whether she always takes her meals in her room. Brightly she confirms it, saying she tries as much as possible to eat in her own room. The real reason, he begins haltingly, is actually because of Jeremy. The scene slips to the dinner table, where the boy turns and asks his father why Mom does not eat together with them. Christophe, faintly aghast, asks why he raises this so suddenly, and Jeremy insists it is not sudden, that he has pondered it long. Flushed and earnest, Jeremy bursts out that a family eats together every day, and that he wants to eat with Mom and Dad. Michelle presses her hands to her cheeks, aghast and touched, asking whether Jeremy truly said such a thing. Christophe admits that is what the boy said, then offers with careful, hopeful diffidence that if it does not bother her. Christophe, faintly sweating but resolute, asks whether she would be willing to eat with them from now on. Michelle, quietly moved, asks whether he would really allow her to share the table, adding she would be happy to spend more time with Jeremy. He confesses that she always keeps an appropriate distance, and strangely enough, even now he feels no discomfort at all, so he asks whether joining them would be impossible. Michelle answers softly that she understands. Then, radiant and beaming, she tells him she would be very happy to join them. Christophe glances away, a faint flush on his face, and admits quietly that this makes him happy. Firmin announces that from now on someone will be sent to escort her from her room each evening, and Michelle agrees. Christophe tells her that is all he wanted to say today, and both apologize in unison for taking up the other's time. Alone afterward, Michelle presses a hand to her mouth and lets slip a small, delighted laugh. She reflects that she is really looking forward to it, as Firmin and the maids bow and bid her good evening. Under a pale night sky, the manor stands lit and quiet, the evening drawing in. Inside, the 2 maids startle at a sudden burst of loud knocking at the door. Michelle, recognizing that eager loud knocking, calls calmly for whoever it is to come in. Jeremy bounds in, bright-eyed and beaming, announcing that it looks like dinner is ready. And so Jeremy has come to fetch her himself. Flushed with excitement, he stretches out his hand and asks her please to take it. Amused and tender, Michelle asks whether this means he will be her escort. She murmurs his name fondly and tells him she will leave it to him. The scene shifts to the dining hall, where a nervous Christophe fidgets with his collar as Firmin sets the table. Composing herself, Michelle enters at last and apologizes to his grace for keeping him waiting. Christophe waves it off, flustered, assuring her there is no need to hurry, since they still have plenty of time before the appointment. Michelle sweeps in on Jeremy's arm in a luminous gown, bowing low as butler and footmen look on. Christophe freezes mid-word, aghast, the sight of her striking him utterly speechless. Straining to hold her graceful bow, Michelle inwardly frets that having Jeremy escort her makes her very happy, but her waist is beginning to protest. Someone stifles a snort, and she wonders in dismay whether he is laughing at her when here she is doing her very best. Jeremy, oblivious and proud, presses a hand to his chest and announces to his father that he has brought Mother. Michelle lowers her head with practiced grace and begins a courtly greeting that it is a pleasure to see him again. Then, radiant and flushed, she thanks him warmly for inviting her today. Christophe stammers that there is no need, that rather it is they who should be thanking her. Firmin bows and beckons the lady this way, and Michelle thanks him, privately noting with quiet feeling that not long ago he still called her merely Miss. Clearing his throat to master his composure, Christophe declares that all right, they should eat. The scene turns to the dark window as the boy launches into a tale, saying that anyway, yesterday. A sweet smell had drawn him to the kitchen, he recounts, where he found the head chef baking a cake for himself, only for Grace to secretly eat some of it. There was so much cake, Jeremy adds innocently, that he does not think the head chef has noticed yet, and Grace swore him to secrecy while the maids grow visibly alarmed. Michelle, strained, confirms that yes, thanks to this telling it is not a secret at all anymore, as Jeremy cheerfully explains he decided not to tell the head chef. Gently she begins to instruct him, saying listen, Jeremy, that if he promises something is a secret, he must not tell anyone. The boy blinks and asks why, and she explains that, for example, she herself might go and tattle to the head chef. Jeremy answers at once that mother would never do something like that, and Michelle, secretly delighted by the instant reply, presses that this was rather too immediate an answer. She concedes with a wry smile that he is right, she would not, but asks what about Furman. Jeremy declares that Furman might let the secret slip, while the butler behind him protests, aghast, that such a thing is impossible. Jeremy dissolves into laughter, insisting he was only joking, while a relieved Furman looks on and Michelle murmurs fondly, "Oh, Jeremy." Leaning close, she gently tells the boy that he has something on his mouth. Christophe advises his son with mild reproach to eat a little more calmly, since he is so absorbed in talking, and Jeremy thanks him sheepishly. Undeterred, Jeremy fires back that no, it is father who is the problem, pointing out that he is eating more slowly than usual today, and Christophe splutters a startled what. The boy insists it is true, and Christophe denies it flatly, growing flustered, while Michelle privately recalls that even before they arrived at the table. Watching father and son bicker, she marvels inwardly that she never imagined she would be able to share such a lively meal with her husband and his son. The food tastes better than usual today, she reflects, with a gentle, very warm flavor, as the whole household gathers round. The scene shifts as a maid leads a drowsy, yawning Jeremy off to bed for the night. Left alone with Michelle, Christophe apologizes for dragging her along today on Jeremy's whim, and when she asks what he means, he clarifies that he means the escorting, the bowing posture she held throughout. Michelle rounds on him, half lightening with embarrassment, demanding to know whether at that moment he had been holding back his laughter. Caught out, Christophe breaks into open laughter at last, admitting that yes, that situation really had been exhausting. He confesses that her strained face contrasted against Jeremy's expression full of pride was such a funny mismatch he could not help himself, then quickly begs her forgiveness for laughing at her struggle to walk. Michelle softens, struck by the thought that his laugh is a little like Jeremy's, and that it seems he laughs like that sometimes too. Until now, she reflects, even when he laughed it was usually only a faint smile, and most of the time he remained utterly expressionless. Flushing, she orders him firmly that enough is enough, that Jeremy was serious so he must not laugh, and Christophe, still smiling, tells her he truly apologizes. He offers, with unexpected warmth, that from now on she may refuse if she wishes, since even being refused is part of a social lesson. Michelle beams and tells him she will not refuse, adding that she enjoyed it in her own way too, privately gushing that Jeremy is so adorable when he tries his hardest to imitate adults. Christophe agrees that is only natural, but tells her there is no need to be overly considerate of the child, and she concedes that if that is the case, then fine. Radiant and unguarded, Michelle declares that when something is wrong, she says clearly that it is wrong. Christophe stills, something flickering across his half-hidden face, and lets slip a quiet ah. Christophe gazes at her with a soft, wondering smile, and muses that perhaps she really is that kind of person. It is a gentle look, the narrator notes, one he usually directs only at Jeremy. But today, for the first time, that same tenderness settles upon Michelle. Reflected in her wide eyes, his image lingers, and she admits her composure wavers just a little, just a very little. Her heart flutters, she confesses inwardly, and she resolves to keep that quiet feeling as her secret alone. The scene shifts to a carriage rattling through the city streets the following morning. At its destination, a sharp-eyed woman in glasses and a bright, round-faced girl greet the arrival, telling her they have been waiting. Furman announces to his lady that starting today she will be working with daily attendance. The two new maids arranged proudly beside him. The cheerful one introduces herself as Sylvie Barreau, while her composed companion gives her name as Penelope Brunette. Sylvie is the third daughter of the Barreau family, a baronial house distantly tied to the Dudevant line, and Penelope the granddaughter of a relative who married into a merchant family. The pair curtsy low and tell Michelle it is a pleasure to meet her. Beaming warmly, Michelle returns that yes, likewise. Furman then invites his lady to please sign the employment contract, holding out the document. Michelle takes up an ornate fountain pen, its jeweled barrel catching the light as she signs. The two new maids watch, wide-eyed, and murmur what a very beautiful fountain pen it is. Michelle thanks them, cradling the pen fondly, and explains that it is something His Grace gave her as a gift. The maids swoon in delight, marveling that as expected of the mark even the case is extremely luxurious, and how wonderful it is to receive something from him. Furman clears his throat to recall them to business. He announces that all right, they will begin right away, and that he will explain the nature of the work. The 4 maids and butler assembled together. For now, to learn the job, Chelsea will be in charge of training Sylvie and Grace in charge of training Penelope, he instructs, and the 2 will take turns day by day serving the lady. Sylvie chirps a bright yes while Penelope calmly informs Michelle that today the 2 of them will be the ones attending to the lady. Furman instructs Sylvie to go to the knight's waiting room at once and summon a knight named Leo, and she blinks back in bewilderment at the word knight. Penelope explains composedly that a guard accompanies the lady whenever she leaves the building, and Chelsea adds that they try to keep one near even within the estate grounds, while Michelle privately notes she had told them it wasn't necessary. Michelle presses a hand to her lips and murmurs a quiet I see. Grace asks whether Michelle has been given a tour of the castle, and Penelope answers evenly that yes, she has already memorized it fairly well, drawing a startled reaction from Sylvie. Grace marvels inwardly at what an impressive girl she is, to have committed the layout of so vast a castle to memory in so short a time. Sylvie, meanwhile, strides confidently the wrong way through a doorway as the others cry out for her to wait and go the other way, and Grace's admiration curdles instantly into dismay. Sylvie apologizes sheepishly after colliding into the group, and Grace, sweating, begins to wonder whether this cheerful girl will really be all right. The scene shifts to a sunlit sitting room where Leo stands guard, Sylvie perched on the sofa with papers in hand, and Furman waiting nearby. Furman gestures to a sketch and remarks warmly that this is a design recently grown popular in the royal capital, asking how this one strikes her. Michelle studies the fashion plates and observes that they all seem to suit Jeremy. Turning to the boy, Michelle asks him tenderly which one he likes. Jeremy beams and declares that he prefers whatever his mom chooses for him, prompting a fond hum from the maids and a wry reminder that tastes might not match, so he should check anyway. Jeremy leans over the table, eyes going wide and luminous with wonder at the illustrations spread before him. The sketches fan out across the table, an array of tailored little jackets and breeches for a young lord to choose from. His eyes shine, brilliant and starstruck, at the sheer array of choices. Jeremy jabs a finger at a color swatch and asks eagerly whether the embroidery on the shirt and jacket could be made this light blue. Furman confirms it with a smile, and Michelle asks, pleasantly surprised, whether Jeremy likes light blue. Jeremy explains earnestly that it is the color of his mom's eyes, reaching out to hold the swatch up beside her face as he begins to say because. Michelle freezes, eyes wide and luminous, undone by the small tenderness with a soft The scene closes on the 2 doting maids swooning in tearful awe at their little lord, marveling that this terrifying, far too handsome child of theirs is only 5 years old. Chelsea remarks that young Master Jeremy is truly lovely, though she confesses, happy as she is about it, that he clings a little too much to his mother, which worries her. Penelope adds serenely that everyone in this castle loves young Master Jeremy very much. Michelle, half hidden, asks quietly whether young Master Jeremy resembles his father. The maids exchange a startled glance and answer that to some extent he must, since they are father and son after all. Michelle recalls Christophe telling her he would try to avoid meeting the maids as much as possible, though she had assumed he would at least have met them during the interviews. She reasons shrewdly that if they are asking whether the boy resembles him, it means they do not even know what their own lord looks like. Gazing up at the wide pale sky, Michelle concludes with dawning unease that His Grace's hatred of women may be worse than she imagined. The scene shifts outdoors, where a startled shriek rings out beside the manor and something goes flying through the underbrush. Leo grips a shovel in dazed despair, sweat beading, stammering out a bewildered me and a strangled why. From above, the garden is revealed dug into long furrows, Michelle and the maids crouched planting while poor Leo digs, wailing inwardly how he ended up doing something like this. Leo protests to his lady that she may not realize it, but he is not a farmer, he is a knight, and Michelle answers flatly that she knows. Michelle observes, without looking up, that if he were a farmer he would be using that shovel far more efficiently, and Leo's face crumples in wounded disbelief. She presses on wickedly that with muscles that impressive it would be a waste not to use them, and cheers him to put his back into it since only a little remains, as Leo screams that she is a devil. Leo rallies desperately, declaring that among the knights only his lord surpasses him in strength, and adds that, by the way, he is an advanced magic knight who wields wind magic, to which Michelle replies that this is unfortunate. Then, Michelle notes coolly that if he were of the earth element the digging would be far easier, and Leo begs her not to look at him as though he were useless. The talk turns as Leo, catching his breath, asks his lady when she obtained all these medicinal herb seedlings, and Michelle explains she had the gardener prepare them, and of course did not use the Marquis family's money. Grinning slyly in shadow, Michelle reveals she took the compensation her adoptive mother received from the royal family and spent part of it on all manner of seeds and seedlings, and Leo yelps a startled "Really?" Leo, puzzled, asks why she suddenly took it into her head to grow medicinal herbs, and Michelle only giggles a small hee-hee. Michelle plants her hands on her hips, beaming radiantly, and declares that it is an experiment. Jeremy whirls around, eyes blown wide into shining stars, echoing an astonished experiment. Michelle smiles sheepishly and apologizes for dampening his enthusiasm, admitting that even if she calls it an experiment, it isn't the sort of thing that would entertain Jeremy. She explains that back at the palace she found an old thesis claiming this country's soil has grown saturated with miasma from the magical beast forest, choking the herbs, though light element magic can purify it and make cultivation possible. Penelope serves tea as Michelle reassures them the miasma is so faint it doesn't harm health, which is why the vegetables grown here are perfectly safe, while a puzzled voice notes that they eat vegetables normally after all. Michelle goes on that at present most of the raw materials for medicines circulating in this country are imported from other nations. She reasons that if such herbs could be produced domestically instead, medicine prices would fall and become far easier for ordinary people to obtain, and the local economy would flourish. Leo, chewing thoughtfully, asks whether all that isn't a good thing, and Penelope counters that something so revolutionary would surely have been done already, to which Michelle answers that this is exactly where the problem lies. Michelle rests her chin on her hand and reveals wryly that the thesis received no attention whatsoever when it was first published, drawing a startled "what" from Leo. She explains that records indicate there were once over 50 saintesses at the time, so with that many the elite decided there was no need to create herb fields when simply casting healing spells was easier. Leo protests that even 50 saintesses couldn't meet every citizen's needs, and Michelle answers coldly that the elite of this country, past and present, are thoroughly corrupt and never once thought of the common folk. She adds that purified soil yields more potent herbs while purification costs less magic than distant healing, so proving it could reach people the saintesses never can, drawing a fascinated eye from everyone. Michelle grins brightly and declares that since it was such a good opportunity, she decided to try it anyway. Jeremy tilts his head and asks what medicinal efficacy means, and Penelope explains gently that it refers to how well a medicine works, so a high efficacy simply means it works very well. The scene returns to the field, where Michelle cheerfully announces now then, Leo, that he should finish planting the seedlings, and he wails a horrified again. Michelle asks whether he doesn't want it, and Leo protests that isn't the problem, insisting fervently that he does, as she promises to cast healing magic on him afterward to spare him the muscle pain. Leo grumbles inwardly about how cruel it is to exploit people this way, while Michelle stands serenely beside him with a small satisfied smile. Then, abruptly, Michelle stiffens as a pair of shadowed eyes seems to loom out of the dark behind her, watching. Turning toward the manor, she notes uneasily that just now she felt as though someone were staring at her. Clutching a cushion, Michelle glances back and wonders whether it was only her imagination. The scene shifts to a quiet room where Michelle, hand to her lips, murmurs that anyway they will go on relying on Leo to do his best. Penelope praises how high Michelle's adaptability is, having assumed women disliked dirtying their hands, yet noting that Jeremy and Penelope pitched in too, which was a great help. Michelle beams, hugging a decorated notebook to her chest, and declares that at this pace they'll finish planting the remaining herbs quickly, resolving that starting today she must keep an experiment log. Her expression freezes, eyes going wide and stricken in the dark. A chair topples over with a violent crash as she wrenches drawers open in a frenzy. Michelle tears the room apart, flinging back covers and searching beneath the furniture, hair whipping with the desperation of the hunt. Bracing herself against the table, sweat beading, she whispers in dawning horror that her fountain pen is gone. She recalls that afterward she kept searching everywhere she could think of, but could not find it. She explains that whenever her husband or Furman summoned her, procedural matters often arose, so she had taken to carrying the pen to sign at once, but that pen was his gift commemorating their marriage registration, beautifully made and fitted perfectly to her hand, a treasure she cherished and used for everything. Chelsea reassures her tearfully that they've informed all the servants, so someone is bound to find it, and Sylvie adds gently for her lady not to worry. The maids note that on top of everything the gardener brought the lady some beautiful roses as well. Michelle softens, murmuring that she should thank him later, realizing that everyone is trying so hard to be considerate of her feelings. Gazing at the delicate pen in memory, she berates herself for feeling utterly helpless and ashamed that of all things she lost something His Grace had given her. Curled small upon her bed, Michelle asks the empty room where on earth it could possibly have gone. The scene shifts beneath a starlit sky as Michelle's voice rises to the manner, beginning that she sincerely apologizes to His Grace. Seated stiffly across from Christophe at the table, eyes lowered, she confesses that she lost the fountain pen he so kindly gave her. Christophe sets down his teacup and answers evenly that he already heard about it from the servants. Turning his gaze on her, he tells her plainly that there is no need for her to worry so much, and calls her by her name, Michelle. Michelle startles, cheeks coloring, marveling inwardly that for the very first time he is calling her by her name directly. Christophe explains, unbothered, that he knows how dearly Michelle cherished and used that pen, and that alone is enough to make the gift worth having given. He reasons that material things, however carefully kept, are bound to break or be lost someday, and this time the day simply came a little earlier, and yet, he adds. Christophe rests his chin on his hand and tells her softly that even so, the fact she is this saddened by it doesn't make him feel bad in the least, as Michelle watches him, wide-eyed and undone. Christophe tells her evenly that if he finds the pen, he will let her know right away, one hand resting on Jeremy's shoulder as Michelle murmurs that she understands, because it was something dear to her as well. He smiles at her with unexpected warmth and tells her softly that there is no longer any need for her to blame herself. Michelle gazes back, luminous and undone, and thanks him very much. Jeremy leans in close and calls to her quietly, "Mother." The child beams up at her, bright-eyed, and announces that so she can regain her energy, he has prepared a gift for her as well. A rolled sheet of paper tied with a ribbon is offered up in his small hands. The bundle sails toward her and Michelle catches it wide-eyed as Jeremy asks eagerly what it is. She unrolls a child's crayon drawing of a golden-haired, light blue-eyed girl among flowers, and reads aloud, uncertain, that this is meant to be her. Jeremy grins and closes his eyes happily, confirming yes, that he drew it himself. Michelle presses a hand to her mouth, eyes shining, utterly overcome. The narrator notes it is not a gaunt, exhausted face in the drawing, but a smile that looks happy. She stares at the crayon figure, flustered, wondering if this is truly how she looks in Jeremy's eyes. Michelle strokes the boy's hair and tells him tenderly that his drawing is very well done, thanking him warmly, Jeremy. Clutching the paper to her chest, she confesses with a trembling smile that she is happy, truly happy, from the bottom of her heart. Eyes closed and glowing, she promises softly that she will take good care of it. Jeremy nestles against her as she murmurs her quiet gratitude, "Thank goodness." The boy positively radiates joy, thinking to himself that he is glad his mother is smiling. Michelle clasps the drawing and all but bursts, declaring inwardly that the child is an angel. Sparkling with adoration, she silently begs his forgiveness for ever thinking he was overly attached to his mother, admitting she was mistaken, gushing what a wonderful child Jeremy is. But in the shadows Christophe folds his hands, watching with cool amusement, and remarks pointedly that he, however, did not receive any painting from Jeremy, did he? Jeremy beams with pride and tells her brightly that yes, this is the first time he has ever given a drawing to anyone. Christophe leans in and asks dryly whether he gets one too, and Jeremy answers with cheerful, merciless honesty that no, he does not. Michelle admits inwardly that she is still worried about the lost fountain pen, and that not finding it truly is sad. Yet she laughs softly behind her hand, confessing that thanks to the two of them her heart has felt very warm. Father and son lean toward one another, the boy flushed and smiling as Christophe regards him with quiet fondness. Amid a haze of light Michelle offers her silent thanks to both of them, her dear husband and Jeremy. The scene shifts to the herb field, where a triumphant Leo throws a fist in the air and crows that they are finally done, and Michelle applauds him warmly for the good work. Doubled over and aching, Leo groans that they used muscles they never usually use and that this is definitely going to cause muscle pain, while Michelle asks sweetly whether it is not good training after all. She clasps her hands and thanks him earnestly for helping so much, promising she will be relying on him again in the future, and Leo cries out in despair that she really is a demon. The peace shatters as a voice comes tearing toward them, calling out for Lady Michelle. A sweating, desperate woman skids up begging for healing, and Leo recognizes her as Tobias, asking wasn't she on external patrol today. The woman gasps that there were no healing duties scheduled for the night order, that it is not one of their knights this time but a child. She explains breathlessly that while inspecting the territory they came across a child run over by a carriage, and pleads that with Lady Michelle's healing magic there is still hope. Chelsea steps in sharply, aghast, and demands whether the woman is really asking the Marquis's wife to rush off and save a child she does not even know. But Michelle throws out her hand without hesitation and orders Sylvie to prepare the carriage immediately, leaving the maid stammering in shock. Chelsea studies her lady a moment, then relents, quietly instructing Sylvie to do as the lady commands. Sylvie bows and hurries off, promising to make the arrangements right away as the others wait tensely behind her. Michelle turns to Chelsea and asks with soft urgency whether she is sorry to trouble her, but could she come along with Leo as well, and Chelsea answers simply, of course. The saint issues her orders with brisk composure, telling Jeremy to stay behind and inform Firmin of what is happening, and directing Sir Tobias to guide them there, as the others answer at once. Michelle sweeps her hair back and steels herself, and turns toward a stranger's dying child with all the resolve of the grand saint she truly is. Michelle is swept along by her retinue, Leo and Tobias adjusting her hair ribbon as she declares fiercely that they are heading to the site immediately. The whole party hurries through the cobbled streets toward the waiting carriage. Michelle throws out her hand and rallies them onward, composed and luminous, as knights and maids press close behind her. Tobias gestures ahead and announces, there, that the child who was run over lies just beyond, and someone cries out in disbelief, Marchioness. A sweating, mustached doctor confirms grimly that yes, the boy's condition does not look good and there is nothing more he can do, while the onlookers murmur that surely that is the wife of Marquis Dudevant. Michelle presses a hand to her chest and asks tightly whether that means his injuries are beyond what ordinary treatment can handle, then steps forward requesting to examine him, only for a stranger's voice to scream at her not to come any closer. A blood-spattered woman clutches the wounded child to her chest and shrieks through her tears for Michelle to stay back, please, not to come any closer.